Good evening. Welcome to the Village Board meeting. Today is Monday, September 11. If you are watching live on Monday, September 11, we encourage you to call in if you have comments or questions. Our call-in number is 769-1677. As always, you can watch live or thereafter in an on-demand webcast at pctv76.org or watch live on Verizon or Optimum Cable TV. Our next scheduled meeting is 2 weeks from today, Monday, September 25 at 8 p.m. with a work session at 7. So as obviously all of us know, today is a somber day, the anniversary of September 11th, and there are ceremonies going on all over the county, and certainly a moment to recall all the losses in this community, especially Lieutenant Charles Garbarini of the New York Fire Department. Had a series of announcements to make. One is folks had been anxiously awaiting news about the possible expansion of our after-school program, the Panther Club at BRS. There were a whole bunch of hurdles to leap in order to fulfill the expanded demand that we had from parents, but we were successful in doing it. So kudos to everybody involved, especially Patty, as well as our rec department staff and the folks that run the Panther Club. Linda Bellafato, our superintendent, Mike Newman, the director of the program, and Mindy Rogers. A lot of meetings, and also thanks very much to the school district. They obviously provide the space for this and were cooperative and helpful in trying to make all this happen. It's a lot of moving parts, and what I do think is important for folks to realize is that we were able to expand the program from 100 kids to about 130. We do think, based on this process we've been through, that is the max. So if the demand should expand beyond that, I don't think we will have the capacity to expand further. So happy news is at the moment everybody who was on the waiting list was accommodated, and we're off and running for a new school year. Just wanted to mention a very happy report from our community garden, which is that they hit a milestone this weekend. Since the farm began in June 2014, this is the garden that's adjacent to St. John's Church and also makes use in the summer of the middle school and high school garden properties. But since this all got started in June 2014, this volunteer group has donated more than 40,000 pounds of fresh food to food pantries. So really an extraordinary venture. Yeah, and thanks very much to Devin Juros, the young man who was behind this in a significant way, his mom and dad, who have been deeply involved, and the raft of volunteers who have made this whole thing work. So not only a great result, but nice to see agriculture established as a use in the village of Pleasantville. So
it's 20 tons, right?
20 tons.
20 tons.
20 tons, yes.
Wow, that's amazing.
Folks have asked, and maybe Nicole, you should just remind people about our nascent Facebook page.
Yes, so for about 3-4 weeks now, we've started a Facebook page for the village. So any of you who are already on Facebook, I encourage you to follow it. If you look up Village of Pleasantville, New York, you will find it. We're hoping to put up some flyers around town within the coming month to alert as many people as possible. So we're letting people know when something is happening in the roads, when there's an important event, a public hearing such as tonight, and putting links and information. And we also get some feedbacks and comments on the page, which is a nice way to sort of be in touch with the community. So so far we have 410 people following. We're hoping to get a good number more.
But it's Village of Pleasantville, New York.
Yes.
It's Village of Pleasantville,
Be
New
careful.
York.
Village
Common
of Pleasantville
New York,
might
yes.
take you to Pleasantville, Ohio, which I
Yeah.
did, and I followed them for a day, and that wasn't.
Yes,
really
and we're gonna,
helpful.
There's a lot
if
of
you
people
go,
I don't know.
also, a simpler way might be if you go to our webpage, there is now a link with the Facebook icon in the upper right-hand corner, and that's an easy way to locate it.
All right, and that is a good opportunity to remind people there's something else to sign up for if you haven't already, and that is our Code Red Emergency Communication Service. Two things to be said about that. The first is, as we always do, we're going through the process of revisiting our emergency procedures, not only because we do it every year around this time, but obviously the goings-on in Florida and Texas remind us all of the experience we can have when we have extreme weather. So after Storm Sandy, I guess it wasn't officially Superstorm Sandy, the village contracted, as many other communities did, with a company that runs a program called Code Red. You can sign up for that, which you can also do with a direct link from our village website, pleasantville-ny.gov. When you link into that, you can provide one or more phone numbers, a cell number, email address, or text number, whatever form of communication you would prefer to receive information, up to you. Fill it in, sign up, and then if we issue an emergency report of some kind, you'll have a means of getting it. At the time of Sandy, when so many folks were out of power, lots of folks were nursing along their battery in their cell phone and still able to get calls there, but weren't necessarily home to hear a call on their landline, or were elsewhere staying with friends and out of reach of us. So the good news about Code Red is that it gets you wherever you are, so long as one of the devices you have listed for us is active. And I'd also point out it's a useful thing for folks who may have relatives who live here in Pleasantville who might be in need of help, and you could end up living in Ohio but would be interested to know when an emergency condition might be prevailing in Pleasantville. So we will never use this for garden variety notifications. This is just for this extreme kind of emergency, like a serious weather condition. So we really hope that every resident would sign up for it. At the moment, we are, what do we have, Patty, 700 and some?
Just under 800
Right.
people.
So
Right.
that's a fraction of the people who really ought to sign up. It's totally free, and we will use it for nothing except a potential emergency thing. So go to pleasantville-ny.gov, click in the left column on Code Red, and sign yourself up if you haven't done so already. Annually, we test this service to make sure that it's working, and we are planning to do that Friday, September 15 at noon. So anybody who has already signed up, or who signs up between now and Friday, September 15 at noon, will receive a test message or email or text, whichever you chose, just to confirm that the system is working and to remind everybody that's going. So
Can I hop in on that?
please do.
So I just came back from dealing with a little bit of the hurricane, and down in Florida, in the communities of Vero Beach and Naples in particular, adjunct what Mayor Scherer just said, the communities that have this sort of system in place are prioritized by FEMA in terms of the restoration of cell service. They've gotten away from restoring landlines because every single one of us now carry around a personal communication device in our hands. So they pre-position, when there's a big weather event like that, they're pre-positioning trailers to get the cell service, and particularly the text service, back up in place. And that would happen here as well. So if you're on one of these auto notify or auto alert types of systems, it is a very high priority that the FEMA and whoever, state emergency management and those guys that are coming in after a big event like this to get those things back up. And the other reason why these things are very important, beyond just the, hey, we're going to have a storm, is down in Florida in this last little cycle we had, towns used this for rumor control. It was actually a very important way to dampen down rumors that were flying around South Florida about all sorts of crazy things. So this type of thing is not just an emergency notification that something is coming. After the event, yesterday and today, it was very useful in telling people what was going on from an official source. Florida there was all sorts of weird stuff going on about what was happening, and the two towns that I was dealing with, Naples and Vero Beach, they were using this auto notification. They have a similar thing to Code Red, to send out official word and say, no, if you're hearing this is not true. This is the actual reality on the ground. So I cannot stress enough how important this type of communication has become for emergency management. If you haven't signed up and you live in Pleasantville, please sign up. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And just to follow on to that, I went, as I do annually, to a county tabletop exercise on emergency planning, and In this case, it was a hypothetical hurricane. Happily, at the moment, we're not in the crosshairs of any such thing, but everybody who lived here during Sandy will recall that there were some neighborhoods out of power for 10, 12, 14 days, which was an eventuality that really none of us had quite imagined was possible in Westchester County, New York, but clearly it was. I think lots of things have been improved since, but it's a clear takeaway that every family ought to have a plan about dealing with their personal safety, what they would do with their pets, making sure they have medications, food, etc., if we had a serious hurricane coming. So as was clear in Texas and again in Florida, there's a period of time when government and emergency services simply cannot help. So it's important for all of us to have a plan like that. There's a website, ready.gov, which has quite a bit of useful stuff, especially for residents who might think, well, what should I think of if I potentially anticipated having to leave my house or to make plans? So,
Or stay self-sufficient for 3 or 4 days on your own with no power. That's
So,
usually the big thing. On a cheerier note.
on a chair. So, at any rate, so as you all, most of you are here for the public hearing on the subject of the zoning. Is there any public comment on some other subject before we get to that? No such comment. Okay. Is there a motion to open the public hearing amending Chapter 185 zoning to make certain use and dimensional changes to properties located within the following zoning districts: RR, double R, single R, triple R, R1, R2, R2A, R3, R4, RPO, RO2, RO3, CO, and A1, to clarify and add certain definitions to create development incentives in the A1 zoning district and to modify certain parking requirements as identified in the attached. That's in our agenda. Some of you folks, maybe we have used them all up, have a strike-through version, and it's been on the website for some weeks. Do I have a motion to open the public hearing?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Welcome to the public hearing. Folks who have followed this for a while will know that we went through an extensive master planning process last year that led to the adoption of a new master plan. That's also up on our website. That master plan anticipated, the primary focus of it was the downtown, and it anticipated a number of potential zoning changes in the downtown, and they are manifested in this zoning change. The most prominent of them would be to allow 4-story buildings where currently only a 3-story building is allowed on the post office side of Memorial Plaza. So 4 stories would be allowed on the post office side in that line of buildings, like the building on the rock, for example, which is itself over 4 stories because it sits on a rock. So there are a number of other changes, and all of those changes are the same as they were when we had the last public hearing, which was, I think, on June 28. So we had a hearing on June 28 about those zoning changes, various comments received. A number of them have been incorporated into this modest change. But we also have a list of proposed changes that came from planning and zoning and from our building department to clean up, modify, clarify, amplify some aspects of the zoning code. And that is why everybody in residential districts received a notice in the mail, because those changes, although most of them are rather minor, all affect, essentially have the potential to affect the entire community. So all of those changes are up at our website on pleasantville-ny.gov in a strike-through format, so you can take a look and see what the existing code looks like and how it's being changed if you haven't already taken a look at it. What I anticipate will happen tonight is we'll hear all the comments you folks have, and we anticipate closing the public hearing. The board has a resolution for a negative declaration. That's part of the State Environmental Quality Review Act requirements, which is a procedural step prior to adopting zoning. But we do not intend to vote on the zoning tonight because we need to hear what you all have to say and then ingest any aspect of it. So tonight is an occasion to hear from you all We have with us Frank Fish from BFJ Planning. BFJ Planning was our lead resource in developing our new master plan. Many of you have seen Frank and his colleague Susan Favate many times before in this room. Also with us tonight is Joel Sachs, our village attorney, and the two good folks who man the Pleasantville Building Department, our building inspector, Robert Hughes, and Lyndon Cambley, the assistant building inspector. So that's the cast of characters. So Frank, if you could just walk people through in a preliminary way what's in play, then we can move to comments from the public.
Good evening. Well, thanks, Mayor, for the introduction. I'm just going to try to summarize the changes that have been made in this. So just so I pick up from what the mayor just mentioned, the first public hearing on this amendments to the downtown zone was back in June. And then comments were made and suggestions were made based upon that public hearing. And I just want to summarize a couple of those. And by the way, there are some extra copies if anybody wants. There's more of these. So there's did you just took all of them. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's only one page. Okay. But I'm sorry, I should have told you that. So basically, yeah. And by the way, I'll explain each of these, and I'll try to do it in 3 to 4 minutes, so I don't take too much time away from your comments. But as the mayor said, the master plan was adopted. It made some suggestions for changes in the A1 district. And actually, I'm going to use the county's letter. The county has sort of signed off on this. They've said they had no objections to any of the proposed amendments to the A1 zone. But their letter nicely summarizes it. And the first one was the A1 district regulations would now allow right here, out here, downtown, residential as a permitted use. So that's the first change. Secondly, it changes the square footage per unit that's needed. It doesn't change the overall density requirement for downtown, but it changes the amount of land area you need for a residential unit. And then third, it simply builds in some incentives for developers for instance, one of them has been mentioned by Trustee Stargiotti to make sure that we get in design guidelines slightly wider sidewalk in the downtown area. So there are certain design incentives built in. And then the fourth thing is that parking regulations are slightly changed to respect the fact that likely development will be right across from the train station. So those are that you'd require 1 parking space for a studio, 1.5 parking spaces for a 2-bedroom, and 2 spaces for a 3-bedroom. Those are similar to what you have now, but there's a slight modification there. And then finally, the fifth thing, as the county mentions, is that was the intent of the A1 zone. And then there were some comments from the building department, who's represented here tonight by the inspector, various amendments to portions of the zone that don't relate just to downtown, but they do relate village-wide, which was just mentioned. So what are these changes? In the A1 zone, basically just downtown in about a 2 to 3 block area, we are changing the height from 3 to 4 stories, which was called for in the comprehensive plan. We've added in this zoning text some 3 design diagrams, which was a suggestion made at the last public hearing, that we sort of draw out what was meant in the A1 modifications. Then you'll see, those of you who have the hard, thick copy, that there's a lot of red lined beyond, it ripples through all of the residential districts, and that's some revisions on accessory structures. And then finally, we put in a comment made by Trustee Stargiotti that you'd have wider sidewalks in the downtown with development coming in. Then there are, I refer to them as the 8 comments from the Planning Commission, which I think everyone agreed with, as far as I know. So we've incorporated those comments. They were made after the June public hearing by the Planning Commission. We incorporated them, sent them all to the county. The county signed off on them, so we're all set in terms of hearing all of your comments tonight. By the way, some of them are simply typographical or English language corrections. But in the definition of height, they had a question on adding the word horizontal as a definition. They had some good catches, and that is that they also said that they noted that the permitted uses, we added vapor bars, lounges, or shops to the excluded uses in the downtown. Then they added some definitions on lot area. And then they also said that they wanted a correction on, in the A1 district divisions, they wanted to add windows to the list of features which determine if a room is a bedroom. And they're correct. When it has a window, then it would qualify as a bedroom, or could qualify as a bedroom. And then that was basically, they also just made a correction on the word in the second line. So most of their comments, as you can see, I wanted you to just get a gist of them. Planning Commission's comments, very helpful, but I would describe them as, in terms of what the mayor said, if the board closes the hearing tonight, they would be able to make, unless something unusual comes up, what's called the negative declaration for carrying out the State Environmental Quality Review Act. And what that means is simply that an environmental impact statement is not necessary. And the reason is that none of these changes, I mean, a correction, a typo, none of these changes rise to an environmental impact under the state law when you go through it. So they're free to do that. And as the mayor said, they'll consider all your comments. So although the hearing may be closed, they will not vote on the zoning because they want to allow themselves discretion to discuss whatever they hear from you tonight, and they may make further changes. Be up to the board.
Thank you, Frank. So let me just there's sort of two categories under discussion, and some folks are here for one and some for the other. So the first category is the master plan changes. And as already mentioned a couple of times, the biggest aspect of that is the change from 3 to 4 stories on the post office side of Memorial Plaza. That was driven by an extended discussion through the master planning process and with a big community involvement about the ways in which we could actually achieve some positive development. One of the problems we've had for a long time is our zoning code quite rightly says if you're going to build new apartments, you have to provide parking for them. And in lots of these sites, there was no capacity to do so, and therefore nothing changed. In a circumstance like a number of the properties in the area on the post office side of Memorial Plaza, we ended up with a series of declining tax assets, essentially properties that become worth less and in the end shift the tax burden more to the residential side because the zoning didn't really provide much of an incentive for a developer to come in and actually do something with those properties. So that was the sort of backstory to that piece of it. So that's the one piece. Then the other piece, and I know some folks are here for that, is some cleanups in the basic zoning text, which are almost exclusively clarifications. Fair to say, Robert? And one of them that we've heard a lot about, and I know some of you are here tonight about, is the clarification of what you can do with, quote, an accessory structure, which essentially is referring to the question of you have an existing accessory structure, almost always a garage, and the zoning code has for decades before this always said it cannot be used for human habitation. That has been a subject of some dispute lately, and so the proposed change doesn't actually change the fact that those buildings can't be used for habitation. It just clarifies what that means. So essentially what that means, and this has been the case for many years, is that you cannot legally take your detached garage and heat it, air condition it, turn it into an office, turn it into a guest house, turn it into a whatever, The basis for that being that the zoning code has setbacks for human habitation that are intended to protect adjacent neighbors from impacts too close to them. And if you allow somebody to convert a garage into something that is no longer a garage and is a house or a party room or an office or whatever, you have created an impact that the zoning code in general wouldn't allow you to do, certainly wouldn't allow you to build a new building that close to the property line. So that's the backstory on that. Happy to hear anybody's comments about any of that. The other piece of it that folks had commented on is that it changes the guideline for accessory structures and requires they be 5 feet from the property line instead of 3.
Correct.
And the reason for that is just to align our code with the state fire code, which says you end up with your detached garage 3 feet from the property line and your neighbor's detached garage 3 feet from the property line, and one burns, so does the other. So that is decisions made above our pay grade, but we're aligning our code with that. None of that would affect your existing garage, which in some cases may be closer than 3 feet to the lot line or even on it. If you have an existing legal grandfathered garage, you can continue to have that without any change. But you wouldn't be allowed to knock it down and build it again in the same place, or in a hypothetical circumstance where a homeowner had no detached garage and wanted one, they would now trigger this bigger setback. So with that, I invite anybody who has comments to come up. We need to get your name and address for the record for the minutes, but we are happy to hear comments from anybody on any subject. And if we, for the purpose of time, if we can avoid repeating stuff that's already been said, that would be great. Come on up.
Kathy Fox, 45 Guyon Street. My question is, why are we considering changing the zoning law to allow a 4-story building on the corner of Bedford and Memorial Plaza, which is now part of Memorial Plaza and the parking lot?
You're referring to the idea of selling a,
Right.
So
Well, I'm actually referring to changing the zoning law to
Right.
allow, whether we sell it or not, why are we changing the zoning law to allow it?
So the zoning law is being changed on the post office side.
Right.
It's not being changed anywhere else. So if you're referring to the master plan idea that nobody has ratified as anything we're acting on at the moment, of selling the south end of Memorial Plaza as a development site, that was something that was discussed as a possibility, potentially as a means of generating revenue that could be used to build parking elsewhere, but that's not on the radar screen to be done anytime soon.
But if the master plan goes through, would the zoning law be changed to allow a 4-story building on that corner? That's how I read it, and I wasn't in the June meeting, I missed that.
It would
But
allow it
little
on the
pamphlet
corner
like-
where PhotoWorks is, right?
But not
But
across.
not across the street.
So to be clear, we've adopted the master plan. The master plan incorporates a lot of different ideas.
Okay,
One of those ideas was the possibility of selling the south end of the parking lot for somebody to build a building on.
right,
This zoning text amendment arises out of the adopted master plan, yes, but not to implement everything in the master plan. Those are all there are a lot of ideas. This zoning text amendment would not impact the height of a building that would be built on the south end of Memorial Plaza were we to sell it. We would, under the current zone, or even if we adopt these zoning text amendments, if this village sold the south end of Memorial Plaza, they could not build a 4-story building. That's not what this text amendment is for. That's not to say that someday in the future, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, a village board couldn't do that. They could adopt another zoning text amendment to raise the height, but that's not what we're doing. So if we adopt these zoning text amendments, and then under that new zoning code, sold the south end Memorial Plaza, that would not be zoned for 4 stories.
okay.
Only across,
Okay,
and-
'cause
on that
that-
block where the post office is.
That's not how I read it, and I just didn't bring it with me, and
We-
that's not what the picture showed me.
We have, well, I'm not looking at it, but we have the A1, for the purposes of this zoning text amendment, broken it down into 2 parts. There's the full A1, and then there's the A1 post office block.
Right,
And that
That's what we're
aspect of it
looking at.
impacts only the post office block.
Okay. And then the second picture that showed the corner of Bedford Road and Memorial Plaza, it had a drawing that kind of mimicked this building. It had the arches, and it said, if we sold the village property. So is PhotoWorks village property? Is that the
No.
property up there?
No.
Well, then why, I'm totally confused, and why did you?
It was a hypothetical that said, if a given parcel were to be redeveloped, here's what you could do. And the core piece of that is, with the requirements we have for parking, on-site parking for offices and for residences, unless you have a big parcel, you can't achieve it.
Right.
So by giving somebody the potential, and honestly, I don't think a site like PhotoWorks alone would even be ripe for redevelopment as an economic matter all by itself. But the idea there is, instead of what has happened over 100 years of development being created without any on-site parking and no place to put the cars, we all end up with the community at large dealing with this problem. So by the same token, because the zoning code is so clear about the parking requirement, there isn't enough economic incentive to actually do any of it, and we end up with some buildings that are a dwindling value to the tax base as well as to the community at large.
Well, I believe underground parking was mentioned. So then basically what you're all saying that is if this master plan does indeed go through.
The master plan
It's
is, we've
through.
adopted.
I'm
this.
sorry, the changes.
The zoning
changes.
Yes.
Okay,
You're
that's
right.
fine,
I
okay.
apologize.
Two different
Make sure we all on the
Right,
same
you're
page.
right, I apologize.
Yeah.
If the zoning changes go through, that corner, which would be I'm really bad on this, is that the northwest corner, I think?
PhotoWorks, you talking about?
No, the
This-
parking lot.
The parking lot,
Across the
okay,
parking
south
lot.
end of the parking lot.
So the zoning
Southwest.
changes will not affect that corner?
Correct.
So they will,
Correct.
Correct.
You are correct, that is correct.
okay. All right, that is not how I read
And
it, so
just to be
thank
clear,
you.
make sure everybody understands, the idea of selling that little corner and building, that is just an idea. That it was a thing that we put in the master plan as let's think about this, but there's nothing connecting what we're talking about tonight to that.
It's
other
not
than
on the
master plan.
radar.
Okay, because how I read it was that the zoning was gonna change to allow that corner, not
No.
PhotoWorks, but that corner to have a 4-story building.
But PhotoWorks, for example, or let's say the block where Foley's is, PhotoWorks all the way down, if the owner of those buildings decided to tear them down, they could build, it would
Right, I
impact
get
them.
that,
That
right.
could be a 4-story building.
Right. Under the changes we're
Under the changes we're
considering.
adopting, right.
Right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Sure.
Other comments? Anybody welcome on any subject related to the zoning?
All right.
Good evening, Joe O'Neill, 42 Grove Street. And the topic I'd like to talk tonight about, Mayor, is the accessory building
Right.
and the uses. Your explanation seems very reasonable, and when you say it verbally, I agree with everything. There should be no bathing, no cooking, no sleeping in an accessory type barn or garage. But the specific activities that are in this proposal of exercise of a studio, of an art studio or an exercise with a treadmill or a weight room, those would be deemed, as I was told, illegal and be out of use for that building. Is that correct?
Well, it depends what you mean by exercise studio. I mean, certainly nobody is concerned, and this code doesn't intend to control the uses to which a garage would normally be put. You got storage in there, you've got a workbench in there, the kids have a ping pong table, you have a treadmill, something like that. But the law has always said that you can't turn it into an insulated, heated, air-conditioned, you name it, building that would be used for, quote, human habitation. So part of what was intended, and we can reconsider the language, was to say all the uses that we would normally consider to be appropriate for a garage are just fine, but when you renovate the building to create, in essence, a house of sorts for some use, that isn't fine.
With this enhanced definition, would there be enhanced enforcement?
Well, so I think what happens is, first off, if you make changes of that kind, to a building, you're required by law to get a building permit and to go through an inspection process, and that would be flagged on that occasion. If folks don't do that and make these changes on their own, if it comes to the attention of the building department, we'll stop it. Are we lying under bushes with binoculars? No, you know.
I specifically, and I
Fair to
spoke
say,
the-
have I described that accurately, Robert?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I did speak to Robert specifically
Yeah,
and asked
yeah.
him if I had a treadmill and exercise equipment. He said I would be out of compliance in my barn.
You want to
So
clarify
if
that, Robert? Maybe come to the mic.
I can't.
But you need to
gotta
come to the
come to the
mic
mic.
so people at home can hear.
Yeah, I know that these changes were suggested by you for clarification purposes, so maybe you can explain, your thoughts on why you thought it was necessary to do that. Maybe that'll
So,
help.
again, I introduced him before, but now you're seeing him face to face. This is Robert Hughes, our
Right.
building inspector.
I've had multiple conversations over 3 years since I'm here, so I'm not gonna sit here and say maybe we didn't discuss it, and a lot of times maybe we're not completely understanding each other. But the intent would be that you have a garage or an accessory structure that's a shed, and you're deciding to change that space and make it habitable space, similar to any room in your house. That's what we're talking about. Certainly not if somebody says, I'm gonna pull the car out, and I'm gonna have a treadmill in there or something. But we're talking about the essence of that garage or shed does not go away. It's simply now you are just changing it for that day or that period, but if suddenly it becomes your exercise room and then all of a sudden there's more lighting in there and you start to insulate the walls and you make it habitable, similar to your house, like an extension of your house, that's what we're talking about here. That's specifically it.
What about basement?
Would you want me to answer that or you want?
Well,
to-
so-
So,
was next.
someone,
Hold on.
so
Hold on.
you need to come up and ask your question if you would. Well, hold on, Joe isn't finished
I
here,
mean,
right?
that's a
Yeah.
much different
Okay.
question regarding it. We're specifically talking about detached accessory structures.
Right.
We're not talking
So-
about the dwelling or basements yet. I
Right.
think we'll get off the topic. We'll get
There was a
there.
question about basements asked from somebody in the audience, but nothing in this proposed zoning change changes anything about the renovation, habitation, use of a basement.
Correct. We're talking about a space that's considered non-habitable becoming habitable, changing the complete dynamics. It's no longer a garage. It's no longer a storage room. It's no longer a shed for your lawn equipment. It's becoming an office. It's becoming an art studio. It's becoming an exercise room. It's becoming just like any room you can have in your house. It's an extension of your house. It's almost becoming another part of your house, just separate and detached from your main principal structure.
Right.
The intent was to get more clarification because human habitation is not permitted, but we don't define it. But my determination would be, an interpretation of that would be similar to habitable. And the state looks at habitable spaces as being anything other than a storage room, a utility room, a bathroom, spaces that somebody would use periodically. You're in, you utilize it, you leave. Not something where you can spend 5 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours, 10 hours, or just continuously every day, repeatedly.
It's a little different.
Yeah, come on
Okay,
up, Joe.
right.
So that's a different intent than what I think you have a very reasonable interpretation, and I think this is just loading the deck of interpreting what I do in my garage or barn every day. If it's painting for 2 hours, it just sets up an adversarial relationship subject to interpretation. And if he doesn't enforce it or the village doesn't, then it relies on neighbors to say, hey, I saw Joe had a treadmill in there for 4 hours. He's out of compliance. And it just sets up a
But I mean,
adversarial, and I just think it loads, the enhanced definition just
So-
loads the deck.
Okay, so we can look at that verbiage, but I mean, I think what we intended to be clear was, if you have a treadmill in your garage that you use in warm weather, fine. If you have insulated and heated the garage so you can use that 12 months a year and made
little gray.
other improvements to the property which make it like your house, that wouldn't be fine. Is that what we're talking about?
I think we just wanted to define what habitable, if we stuck with.
Okay.
Can you eat, sleep, and bathe in it? That seems to be very cut and dry. There's no bathroom, there's no plumbing, there's no
oven,
cooking. That's very identifiable and understandable. It's not becoming an Airbnb. If it is a,
That's another question.
if
It's
it's,
a room where
if it's a barn that, that changes use and to have a stop clock saying I'm in and out for 4 hours a day.
I mean,
That's silly talk that I can't.
look,
Get in touch
whatever,
with.
you're building a picnic table, whatever,
Right.
all
So-
the things that people would normally do in an outbuilding, in a garage. I mean, I think that, and perhaps we can rethink the
What you
language a
say-
little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I
Okay.
like what you say, and I just read a little
Okay.
stricter.
The other
Understood.
thing I think, Robert, you want to add
Thank you
why
very much.
we're, thanks, Joe, why we're doing this. I mean, we're not trying to make things unreasonable. There's rules and reasons why the zoning rules exist, right? There's safety considerations, and that's why this is important to get our arms around everybody together.
Right, well, first of all, it's been in the zoning for a while, so I really wouldn't know the specifics of why it may have been instituted originally.
I mean, it's been in for decades.
But the
Right.
intent would really be, it could be as simple as, you're permitted to have these habitable spaces and have a.
Robert,
You gotta
she's
go
asking
into
you
the
to
mic.
speak into the microphone.
Or you can
Turn the
pull it out if
microphone
you
so
want.
can face
You can
people.
pull it
I
out.
don't know if I wanted to face it, just
That's,
wanted.
no,
Turn the microphone.
You can
It's
pull
okay,
the
we
mic
can
out,
talk.
you can pull it out of the,
Can you hear me now? Is that?
Yeah.
yeah.
Want me to hold?
Don't get the
Can you hear me
disco
now?
going.
Thank you.
All right.
Take it away, Robert.
Can you sing Moon River?
Okay, that's not gonna happen.
All right.
Okay, so what we're talking about is, let's say families have kids, and you finish your basement down there and they have a music studio, okay? Permitted use in your house as a one-family house or even a two-family cell, okay? And suddenly you say, you know what? I'd really like to change my detached garage and make that the music studio where they're gonna be. Now think about it. You have setbacks that are increased for the building, the principal structure. The accessory structure currently can be 3 feet up to a property line. The neighbors could have an issue and even a fire rating, as the mayor talked about before with regards to the exterior wall. You are that much closer to your neighbor performing those actions that you do in your principal structure. So I would believe that the intent was with that in mind. It only. But what I'm saying is, that's something that we're looking at from a perspective that I look at is, say, when you're talking about a habitable space, you're talking about spaces that are typically in your principal structure, which is now going to a detached accessory structure much closer to your property line and obviously your neighbor's property.
So, Robert, aside from the fact that it's your understanding of what our code has meant, even though I may not have said it explicitly as you, aside from that fact, that you think it's meant that and you're just trying to clarify it, is there do you see any reason why, for example, somebody couldn't have a treadmill in their garage or use it as a workshop, not for business, but for their own work? They like to build tables for themselves. They want to build a table, they give a workshop, or whatever it may be. Do you have any reason why we shouldn't allow that? Or it's just really a question for us as a community to decide?
Personally, how I look at it is, I've said it to multiple people, maybe not everyone in here. You guys write your zoning, not the building inspector, through your board of trustees. So what the village decides on, I just enforce. What I'm trying to do is clean up the gray area, so we're not at my counter so debating over something, because ultimately I have to interpret it and make a decision. So the more it's written in black and white, I'm just gonna be honest, it makes my job easier. And I have to interpret it because the way it's written right now says not to be used for human habitation. I have to make a determination on that.
Right.
Did you answer his question, though?
No, I think he did answer. I think he answered the question. No, it doesn't matter to him. He doesn't have a professional.
I
certainly
never
not
have a
personal.
personal-
Hold on.
I don't have a personal stake in this in a sense of how you want to function in your village. That's up to you to decide. That's why we have this open forum and discussion.
I just wanted to know, Joe, whether there was maybe some higher, the state law compelling this or something. It doesn't sound like there is, that we have the discretion to do things. And so I want to hear what everybody has to say and try to come up with some language that works. I tend to feel that there are certain uses in a garage or a shed or big shed or a barn that are as different than storage of your car and your lawnmower, but that is completely appropriate for the building. I do, and so I think it's worth working on the language.
My personal is, I always kind of make a statement. You don't want to be halfway pregnant. You can't be, okay? So you're either one way or the other. Because when you start to incorporate, well, you know, you can do this but not that, I can tell you that's where it becomes problematic. So I'm more of the type to say, let's be on this side or let's be on that side. You either permit the habitable spaces or you don't, because of you can't account for every specific situation.
All right, thank you. So, Robert, and other folks who want to speak, come on up. You need to
Can you
come
come up to
up
the
and
mic?
name and address.
Robert, bring the mic to him then.
He can. He's
No, he's coming.
Bill is a
Billy will
Bill.
outrun you.
He will outrun all of us. Yes.
Bill Belmont, 44 Martling Avenue. Would running an electric line to an accessory building, how would you regard that?
No
it can
problem.
have
I think a lot of outbuildings have
Many
electrical
outbuildings have
outlets.
electrical outlets, electric
lights.
garage door openers, lights, whatever.
No? Okay.
No problem.
There you go.
Thank you. Hi, Tony Bales, and this is my husband, Maurice Nasrallah, 465 Bedford Road.
Uh-huh.
First of all, I want to thank you because I think the master plan looks really great. We're very excited because it shows that the village is really trying to do a lot, and you guys are trying to do a lot with us in improving, what the village is all about. We came from Terrytown, spent many years in Terrytown. You guys have all seen the rejuvenation that has happened there.
Yeah.
We really would love to see something like that here in Pleasantville. And I think the town has such capability and such potential. It doesn't have to be a river town, but we see Terrytown, we have 4 sons.
We
they're
have the
all
Sawmill
older.
River, but it doesn't.
Right.
Yeah.
The bridge is still.
We can do it. But I think it's just very exciting, and it makes a lot of sense because you do need more money, to come in. Businesses come in and they're successful, as you get more residents in, the businesses grow, everything grows. And to do it right, with the right facades and the right thing, we know how to make the town look really good. I think everyone wins. Okay, so we're very happy about that. Specifically, we are very happy about the fourth, being able to add a fourth level, on the side of, we own that corner building there.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so we very.
The Photo
excited
Works
about that.
building?
Yeah. Okay, and so we're very excited about that. My question is, when will the zoning be be agreed to?
To be determined.
So depending on what we hear tonight,
Okay,
it could be as early as our next meeting, which is 2 weeks from today.
okay,
But that is going to be entirely dependent on the upshot of the discussions tonight. As I mentioned, those issues, the 4-story and the like, were already the subject of a public hearing on June 28th. And the commentary about that that we agreed with has been incorporated. So that part of it has been pretty well vetted, although we may hear new stuff today. So
Okay.
I would say possibly in 2 weeks, but no promise.
great.
Right.
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I think, I would second what Tony said. I think that's great. And also the zoning regulation for the parking is very reasonable. One parking for a studio and 1.5 for 1 bedroom and 2 for 2 bedrooms. There's only one problem: you cannot create space.
Right.
Oh, they cannot. I think the zoning requirements, the proposed zoning requirements, is very reasonable. There's only one problem: you cannot create space. And I have actually a suggestion. I see a lot of space above the train track. Why can't we use that?
Well, oh my God.
Crossed our
So,
mind.
actually, recently
We see that
engaged,
too.
recently engaged a conversation with Metro North about an even more modest project than that. But first off, there are air rights, you have to buy them, and it is very expensive to build over an active train track. It's a millions and millions kind of a project. So we have always thought that the modest effort of decking over the section of the tracks where the parking lot behind Dunkin' Donuts and the bookstore is would be a perfect way to extend that parking lot. Vice versa, it would also be nice to do so in the south end here with the parking lot behind Lucy's. But there isn't any question that those would be projects that would cost some millions of dollars, and the dollars wouldn't be recouped through parking fees. at least no parking fees that anyone was willing to
It's
pay.
not
So,
paying.
there's a little more complexity to that, but that said, you got to start with a vision, not with the reasons not to do something. And so we've re-engaged the discussion with Metro North, and who knows, maybe there are grants or something of that kind. I think it highly unlikely that decking over the main section of the train tracks would be viable, but certainly in those two sections, north and south, it's something we've always thought about.
Mr. Mayor, I agree with you. Okay, it may not be viable. However, if you bring developers who will promise to build 4-story building and the first floor will be parking, then it may be viable.
Well,
And
and
the
you know,
calculation,
I mean,
the calculation has to be done because, what's not viable in the next 2-3 years? Okay, it may be viable 10 or 20 years.
I mean, obviously, those will always be revisited. Certainly, one of the leitmotifs of the whole master planning process was ways to reinvigorate some areas of the community that have been moribund, but to keep Pleasantville. So, we've had developers come and say, give us Memorial Plaza, we'll build an 8-story building and build you whatever parking you want underneath. No, that's not us. That's not the community that we are seeking to sort of grow or incrementally. All useful commentary, and those are discussions worth keeping.
All I want to recommend to you, I'm an engineer, I've been an engineer for corporate America for 35 years.
Yeah.
When you have a master plan, you have to use all the fields that you have. You cannot keep changing it because it will cost a lot of money.
Right.
The master plan have to, even if you're not going to build this now, like putting a train on Tappan Zee Bridge, it has to be allowed for.
Right.
So whatever you agree to, this has to be a consideration because the population will explode, and there's nothing worse than having no parking.
Well,
That limits.
in the course of the master plan, we talked about the possibility of allowing 4 stories on the bookstore side of Washington Avenue, for example. And in the end, elected not to proceed with that because there were significant concerns from neighbors about the impact of such a change in their neighborhood. So that could be revisited at some point in the future, but through the planning process that we went through, we decided to focus on this section of the community, the post office and your side of Memorial Plaza, where we have a bunch of sites that are clearly ripe for redevelopment. So
Yeah.
it's an
We
incremental
agree.
process.
We thank you very,
All right.
very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Come up, wait in line there. Welcome back.
Kathy Fox, 45 Guyon Street again, and I
Yes.
apologize.
In the mic, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't bring the paper with me, but I have it online from your site. Zoning analysis under proposed zoning. And it's a 4-story building, and the map clearly shows, and if I can bring it up to you, project site, 12, and it is the parking lot.
And this is from the master plan?
Yeah, but it's from your, it makes it look here. It's the zoning, addendum, or I'm not
Right.
sure what you call it. But you see it clearly is the parking lot. This is PhotoWorks, it's across the street from PhotoWorks. This is showing a 4-story building being built on the parking lot.
And is that, I can just see, is that the,
And you can't turn it, I apologize.
No, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's the zoning.
I'm looking through here in
It's
my
page
cup.
12.
Document, isn't
I'm trying to get to that
I got it off the village website.
I saw it too.
Yeah.
You did, right?
Yes,
Thank you.
I agree with you. It's absolutely
Well,
misleading.
okay,
And
well,
it talks about selling village property,
Yeah.
and what it says is we're going to change the
I
zoning.
think
to
you're in the
allow
master-
4-story buildings.
I think you're in.
You're in the master plan there, you're not in the
It's not
zone,
It's
right.
not the master plan.
No, it was
When
listed
you go to the
as
No,
website.
it's in the
it's-
EAF.
For tonight's hearing.
I see.
It's in the
Right.
EAF. It's in the environmental assessment form.
it? Okay.
But, okay, regardless of that, it's not what's on the table.
Yeah, but you have to understand, when you propose things.
First of all, I totally understand that, believe me. What I'm just explaining
It
to
sends a very bad message to the public. You're telling us one thing and we're reading something that comes from your office.
So
You need
come on,
to
you
step
need
up
to
to
come to
the
the
mic.
microphone.
You need to come up to the microphone. And just to be clear, no one up in this board is trying to mislead anybody, okay?
I'm not doubting that, but I'm trying
Right.
to make a statement saying that when people,
Okay.
when you
Thank you.
put things out there for the public to review,
It's in the environmental assessment form.
which is not that, you know,
But that is not what's considered, that's not what's being proposed.
I understand that, but what, you're missing what we're saying.
I understand.
No, I'm not.
When you put something on your website specifically that's supposed to be aligned to tonight's meeting for the hearing, and there are 3 documents that are listed there. One's a summary, one's 32 pages of summary, that's where that particular thing came off of. The first item is a 29 or 22 page of all that zoning, which is what you just handed out. And then there's
This may not be the right
map
copy,
of the, of all the zoning. So when
It's not the same one.
somebody
I'll
in
find it,
the
right. Yep.
public is reading that, the interpretation is
Yeah.
that's gonna be part of the
Okay.
proposal for the zoning change.
It's all right, we'll find it.
I'm
right,
just saying,
so just-
if you
just-
could identify yourself again and the address that you would, that'd be great.
My name is Nancy Barry. I'm actually here on behalf of my parents, the Galeas, on 166 Washington Avenue. I grew up on Washington Avenue when I used to be able to play on the street and be lucky if we saw a car in 2 hours.
So
So that just dates
just to ask
me.
you, although it isn't, the,
Yeah, I just pulled it up, it's right here. It's,
The-
but it refers to the master plan.
the proposal right now is not to sell, there's no proposal to sell the south end of Memorial Plaza, but, no, I know, listen, hear me out. Do you object to 4-story zoning on the post office side, which would incorporate potentially the Photo Works building, but feel differently about the property immediately across the street?
I actually oppose it, all of it, to be
Okay.
quite frank. What you're proposing is to, and this is what I took right off of your documentations on the website, the current zone is for a 3-story building. And now you want to go to a 4-story building. To kind of sum it up, you want to go from 30 units of residential units to 73 units. And my concern is, it's all well and good that you have this property and your owners, and there's no denying that you could develop it to a certain degree, but it's got to be reasonable and prudent to the rest of the town.
Where are you getting
Well,
the
you're-
73
wait a
units
second.
from?
You're comparing
So,
Terry
excuse
Town.
me,
Wait.
we're not having an exchange
All
between
right,
audience
but
members,
what I'm
just
trying
talking to
get-
us.
What I'm trying
Right.
to say is they have a right to develop their property with it that's
Right.
reasonable and prudent. You're comparing Terrytown, which they're developing on the old GM.
So that's Sleepy Hollow. So here's the story. Happy to have your commentary about the 4-story or not, but what we're talking about is the post office side of Memorial Plaza.
Right.
That block. And that's been the subject of a tremendous amount of discussion with broad community input through the master plan process over the past year and a half. So I do think it's fair to say that this board is in support of it. And I can say that we've been through a public hearing specific to that, and there were I'm sure, obviously, there are always folks who feel differently about one thing or another, but I do think that we are not trying to turn the community into the next city. We're trying to create viable zoning that would allow properties to be redeveloped in ways that would support the community's interests,
So my concern is, or my question to you all is, at what point do you deny other people from having the same opportunity? So let's say somebody on Wheeler Avenue decides, well, why don't you rezone Wheeler Avenue to 4-story so that we could build above there?
It's been
They
suggested.
can
We had
ask.
that conversation.
They can ask, and
Well, I
thus
know that,
far
that's
we
why
have
I'm
said.
proposing it, that's why I'm stating it.
Right.
Because,
But
you
our,
know,
our
the-
motivation isn't to suit the needs of individual developers. It has to do with a larger vision for the community as a whole. And, you know, when we're talking about if we're going to rezone this, why don't we expand further? The reason we're limiting it to a very specific area of the downtown is because that's an area that will have less of an impact on the residential areas. We're you know, deliberately moving incrementally with this redevelopment. But it might be useful too to talk a little bit more about the motivations behind this in terms of trying to shift the burden a little bit off, the tax burden a little bit more off of the residential segment of the community, which because of the sort of the stymied state of the commercial section of the downtown has increasingly taken the lion's share of the tax burden, but also because we're hoping to revitalize and render more dynamic the downtown of Pleasantville as well, without completely sacrificing, the spirit of or without sacrificing at all the spirit of the small, more intimate community.
Right. My only concern is
Okay.
that,
Excuse me, please be quiet.
my only concern becomes, at what point do you stop having all these rental apartments coming in? I understand your point. You're stating that all the defunct, or you want to try to generate more business, or you offset the tax basin, but there's no, you don't take into consideration that people move into apartment buildings, they have children. That, all of this has an impact on your infrastructure. Your infrastructure is your sewer lines, which I can't even remember the last time that they were.
Can I stop you there and just to intrude on that point? We have taken that into deep consideration with pages and pages and pages of the master plan, talking about our sewer infrastructure, our water infrastructure, the potential impact on kids in schools, school kid generation, all of the above. So you may ultimately disagree, but it's worth a read to go back to the master plan because a lot of that stuff is laid out.
Right, and I did, and I've taken all the reports that were done on, I guess, SECRA, or, different traffic studies and not what, which, by the way, just as a little note, in that summary, there was no traffic study done on Washington Avenue, which I don't understand why that wasn't done.
We're not changing the zoning on Washington Avenue.
But I don't think you guys are really looking at the bigger picture here.
We spent 2 years looking at the bigger
I
picture.
understand what you do.
Yeah.
You're looking at different things, but you don't understand the impact that, people come from other towns to come to the farmer's market. They're cutting across, from Chappaqua, and they're speeding down Washington Avenue.
I am 1,000% willing to continue this conversation with you, but it's not really about the zoning that we're talking about now. So I don't mean to cut you off, but there are folks who want to say something specifically about this public hearing. So if you want to give me your contact info, I'd be happy to sit down with you.
Absolutely.
And go over this in detail.
Sure, thank you.
Okay.
And I apologize, I'm only still here because I
Okay.
feel like.
Make sure you,
sorry.
yeah.
I feel like I didn't get an answer. I believe you that you guys felt that this zoning change wasn't gonna happen, but when I read the paper, I'm not a lawyer, it looks to me like it is going to happen. And it scares me to think that maybe.
What zoning change is going to
What
happen?
I just showed you, that there could be a four-story building.
We're not
That is a
voting on that.
schematic. That is a
That's-
theoretical schematic.
What?
But none of you were even aware of it. That's
No,
what-
hold
that's
on,
what-
hold on.
Frank has a clarification here.
I know if you look at all these documents at once, it can be confusing. There's kind of three documents. There's a master plan. The master plan was done, as the mayor said, in the last 2 years. The master plan's been adopted. It's in place.
Right.
It's on the web. It's in place. What else is now before you is this proposed zoning. And then there's a third document, which someone referred to. There's an environmental assessment form. And that long form I just looked at with the manager, that form describes both the zoning and the site I believe you're talking about, which is the south end of the parking lot. And yes, that's right. That's from the environmental assessment form, which goes over a series of actions. The one you're speaking about now is not subject to the zoning. So just to clarify again, the zoning is only the post office block. The environmental assessment form, though, however, goes over the bigger picture, trying to put it in context, and is describing some of the recommendations of the master plan also. But those are not before the board. What's before the board is solely the document that I think a lot of you have, and that is solely the zoning of the post office block, one block. And there was a question earlier, well, what prevents everybody, somebody on Wheeler Avenue to make the same application? It's not consistent with the master plan. So that's what prevents it. The board would have to amend the plan before they could consider any further expansion.
And wouldn't you
of the
agree
zone.
that all, Frank, doesn't that also then tend to prevent builders from coming and trying? I mean, or not prevent, but dissuade them because they know it's not part of the vision
It's
that
not
we
part of
laid
the
out in
vision,
the master
right.
plan.
Yeah.
But then this corner would be consistent, and it is being looked at in the master plan.
That-
That's what
It's
it's
being looked at in the master
right.
plan, but it is not subject to this hearing
Right.
tonight because the zoning change is only for the post office block.
Which is
I
to
wanna
say,
clarify that.
the idea of doing that was discussed in the master plan, but no, I understand. We did not move forward with changing the height anywhere except that one block.
Okay, all right. You should not have included that in what you put in.
Well,
there.
except we
I have to
had.
tell you, I'm on the
Right.
site and I can't find what you're looking at.
Whatever.
So you can
So,
show me,
yeah.
but you
Look, I believe it's there, so.
Look, just
Okay.
for clarification again, everybody, the master plan is a sheet of ideas. It is not a roadmap. It is, well, it's a kind of roadmap, but it is not anything that is imminent. It is not guaranteed. It is simply, here are some ideas that we have that might help accomplish what Nicole was mentioning, that we want to do some things in downtown Pleasantville that encourage the right kind of activity down here. That keeps Pleasantville, that keeps us, the village that we are, that we all love, but allows this village and this village board to attract developers and developing interest in the right way, okay? So it's real, we had this during the master plan public hearings as well, and again, we just have to reiterate, what's in that master plan is a I wonder what if kind of document. What we're doing tonight is changing the zoning to potentially implement some of those ideas in a very narrow swath of our town. Just to
Okay.
make sure that's clear.
Sounds.
Sorry. Losing my voice.
Hi, Steve O'Neill, 215 Edgewood Avenue. Nothing as sexy as the master plan, but I just want to reinforce what my neighbor talked about with the habitation issue. I think one suggestion I might have is take the word habitation out, because as we all went to school, habitation is about living. You need a bathroom, you need to eat, you need to do all those functions. I think what Robert's saying, or is implying, I think, is that if you put insulation and sheetrock up and have it as a gym, it's going to raise some suspicion. I don't agree with the mayor's assumption that I can work out during warm weather in my garage, but when the winter comes, that treadmill can't be used. So the thought of taking the word habitation out, I think, would help, because I think it's confusing a lot of issues. I mean, if I just
So,
want to put a gym in,
The-
and
the-
you say it's okay, but if I put up insulation, Robert's going to have some concerns
Right.
about it.
So the struggle we have, and I mean, the folks on the planning commission and the zoning board see this all the time, is however you write the code, people try to take advantage of it as much as they can. And you end up, I mean, we end up all the time with circumstances where a neighbor has done or wants to do something and an adjacent neighbor doesn't want them to do it. So I guess what I would ask you, just in the category of a question, is, okay, so you have a treadmill in the garage, you put up sheetrock and drywall because you want to use it in the winter. Have you heated it? Have you taken down the garage doors and put up a permanent wall? Those are sort of the gray areas where somebody says, well, where have you gone too far from what was really an accessory outbuilding and turned it into an extension of your house? That's the question.
But those aren't gray areas. I mean, if you're talking about habitation, and if that's what the definition is. then
Meaning
that's what-
live there.
Live there,
Okay.
right? If you're going to live there, I agree with you. That should not be allowed. If you're going to have a band playing concerts there, as Joe said, that's noise abatement. That's a police issue, right?
Well,
I mean, what I'm suggesting is, I mean, I want to build a workshop. I'm not going to disturb anybody, right? This law has been on the books for years, okay? I've lived here, I don't know, 26 years. I know everybody in town, okay? There are garages that are filled with gym equipment. There are garages all over town. So this law has never been enforced, People have sold their houses with beautiful garages.
Right, and they've needed to get that legalized.
You mean they're not
before they can
garages
sell it.
anymore?
I mean, they did run into that. It hasn't necessarily been as
Well,
enforced.
so you're saying they're not garages anymore? They've been turned into something else? Is that what you're
I
saying?
would consider it a garage, but it's got gym equipment in it.
But it can't be used as a garage anymore because it's been turned into, it has carpeting, it has,
Right.
I mean, is that what you're saying?
No, I mean, I wouldn't say there's carpeting in it, but there's second floors to these places that have,
I think that's where the nuance comes, is if the primary use of the space has ceased to be a garage, has ceased to be a thing that would normally be reasonably considered to be a garage, and that use has now permanently been moved to something, as Robert was saying, that would traditionally and reasonably be considered a room in a house. Doesn't mean habitation, like that's where you sleep. I mean, one doesn't sleep in their TV room, well, not unless, you know.
their wife gets married.
Right. So, you know, I think that's where the nuance is, and that's what's hard for all of us to try to get our arms around, is where is that line? If you, like, I'm also of the opinion that if I'm gonna put an exocycle in my garage, that seems to me not an unreasonable thing to do, but like Robert was saying, if
What
it's.
about insulation?
Right, I mean, I would not wanna have to not use it in January either, that's just me personally.
Sure.
Again, though, from our perspective, the clearer we make the language for him, the less argument there is. So where's that line between what used to be a garage has now been permanently kind of changed over to something else, and a garage that has an exercycle in it and a little bit of sheetrock so that you can use it, right? And that's what we struggle with.
I mean, it's
I'm
all,
not disagreeing with
it's
you.
all about impact on neighbors is what it's about.
The only suggestion I'm making
Okay.
is you need to really spell this out.
Yeah.
Okay,
Really spell it out.
Understood.
Because right now, it's not clear. Robert's doing his job, he's got one interpretation, you have another interpretation, and there's garages all over town that have
Right.
Another
beautiful.
interpretation.
Another, multiple interpretations.
May I suggest it would help if we could try and be as specific as possible about the objective, you know, what we're trying to achieve. So if the issue is the neighbors specifically, how do we define what the problem
right, I
is,
mean,
you know?
the issue is about giving a homeowner the affirmative right to do something very close to their neighbor's property, which hitherto has not been permitted, so.
But what if we have a garage that's not near somebody's property line? Is that no longer an issue
I mean,
then?
that is a nuance that could be explored, so,
option.
welcome.
I mean, some people's cars are louder than anything else they would do, so.
I'm Tony Plaquet, I live at 29 Wilton Road. I don't have a detached garage, but I certainly use my attached garage as a workshop. I bring a space heater in there in the winter because projects sometimes run into the winter, and it helps if it's a little bit warmer than 25 degrees if you're going to try to do good woodworking. What the other gentleman said, look around the village. There are people, I don't know how many houses I know of where the car has never seen the inside of the garage. Now, some of it is not what I would call habitable space, it's junk space, but
Right.
many of them are used as workshops. I mean, what is wrong if someone wants to convert his separate garage into a studio where he paints? Or she paints,
So
or they do.
Nothing's
throw
wrong
pottery.
with it, except that the neighbor who used to, and some neighbors wouldn't mind, but what the zoning does is gives people affirmative rights to do something and denies the neighbors the right to object in a way that would stop it. You move in, I mean, certainly in my neighborhood, you've got lots of detached garages right on the property lines, and they're in almost sort of a privacy buffer between the backyards, and everybody moved in recognizing that it's a garage. If it turns into something that's heated and air conditioned and has lights and people there all night or late into the night, then suddenly the activities of living are much closer to your property than you imagined they could be. That's the issue. And honestly, I mean, as you guys, everybody in the room knows, there are folks that do things without a building permit because they either couldn't get a building permit or they don't want to go through that process because they think it would enhance the value of their house and increase their taxes. But as soon as you say you can do X, there will be a whole bunch of people trying to push that limit. And so I think Steve was right in saying that clarity in the language is the whole story there. I mean, is somebody out in the garage with a space heater working on their next great cabinetry project a problem? Probably it isn't. Is the person who has heating, air conditioning, lights, skylights, fans, pellet stoves, the whole 9 yards, is that a problem? It may not be in some settings to some neighbor, but the zoning potentially says you can do that wherever you want and your neighbors can't stop you.
If it becomes a noise issue, if it becomes a light issue, I believe there are things that can stop it. But I think, and I don't mean this personally in any way, err on the side of the homeowners, not the side of the building inspector.
Well, don't aim this at Robert, as he
Yeah,
says.
No, I said I don't mean it personally.
And by the way, to my thinking, there are not two sides. It's Robert's going to do whatever we tell him to do because he works for us. That's what it is, and he'll tell you that. He told us that before.
Well,
we just have to figure out what the right thing is.
I think ultimately it has to be use. Okay. So everybody's agreed. You shouldn't turn it into an apartment to rent out. Nobody wants that. But letting people insulate so they can use their workshops in the winter with a space heater, so they can do their painting in the winter with a space heater. Some guy's an amateur author. He goes there and that's where he creates his paperback novels. How's that going to disturb the neighbors in today's world?
All I can say is I have sat here for many, many years on this board and other boards, and I can tell you with great certainty that when folks propose, for example, to put an addition on their home and come for a variance because it's too close to the lot line or whatever, frequently dramatically farther away than an outbuilding, it's a subject of great controversy in some settings. Other settings, everybody's coming to support.
And those are handled as individual cases. They get a variance or they don't get a variance.
Right. The problem here is what kind of a variance would you get? Because it's a use variance, and those are hard to get. It's not an area variance that says you're too close to your property. So,
I think we should allow people to have workshops and studios and stuff like that in detached garages.
Okay, and should we allow them, should you be allowed to build a new one? I'm just asking this question, I'm not taking a position. Let's say you don't have a detached garage. You'd be allowed to build a new detached garage 5 feet from your property line and use it for the kinds of uses you're describing?
I think that if it's a new one, you folks might consider what is the appropriate setback for a new one. I'm not saying I want to just build on a problem that you're already trying to grapple with.
Yeah.
But for new, setbacks have to be greater.
And why,
if they
again, I'm not taking a position on this, but why would we make a distinction if some use that had never existed is going to be created in an existing building versus creating?
It's the use issue.
Right.
So the use of one guy in an old garage is technically no different than a use of a fella in a new garage.
I see your point.
That's hard from our standpoint to delineate those.
But what I'm saying is, I think the way it's written now and the way I think the building inspector is going to interpret it is not appropriate for the average homeowner here.
Okay, understood.
Thank you.
Can I,
Please.
2 minutes.
You don't?
just to include.
Yeah.
Currently in the zoning right now, when you have a garage on site, you have a certain setback requirements for the principal structure. You remove that garage, or you build a new house without one, those setbacks increase. So that's a big issue too that I take into account. When you change your garage to something other than a garage, you could actually create a non-conforming situation with your current existing house. So that's also part and parcel, which possibly when they talked about this was saying the same thing, wanting the garages to be kept because that was in the code for a long time. So I just want to also reiterate that they're talking about that as well. The setbacks also come into play when you're talking about having a garage or not having a garage.
Thanks, Rob.
Welcome.
I'm Karen Pastor. I live at 15 Grove Street. We don't do anything in our garage. That's not my question. There was a lot of information in here about parking regulations and the ability to waive them for certain developments.
Right.
The very last page, you have a note which says the Planning Commission has the right to waive all or any parking regulations, does that refer to all projects unilaterally or only one particular part of this code?
That's a good question.
Let me go to that.
It's the very, very last thing on the last
Yeah,
page.
you want to comment, Frank, on,
There's a note with an asterisk.
yeah.
And there's a
I'm
lot
just-
of redacted or crossed out information.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's referring just to Schedule 8. This is your last note.
Yeah.
It refers to everything or just?
We were, of course, looking at the A1 zone, so I've got to look at whether anything applied to the rest of the code, but when we wrote it, everything was applying to the A1 district. What we found in the existing code, the existing language, which I thought was unusual, that the Planning Commission has the right to just waive all the parking. We thought that was, we discussed this with
Yes.
trustees.
At
We
length.
thought that
Right.
was kind of broad. So we suggested limiting that waiver, I think, to, we ended up, I don't have it in front of me.
Yeah, I mean, I do.
But I
It-
think it's
Yeah.
50%.
Yeah, I think it was half.
Well, and it's even more, it says notwithstanding provisions of 185-19.1, which is the parking requirements, if a municipal parking facility is located within 200 feet of a proposed specified use on a lot in the Central Business A1 District, the Central Business A2 District, the Peripheral B District, or the Peripheral B1 District, and if the Planning Commission deems such facility, that would be the municipal lot, to be adequate for part or all of the needs of the proposed use, the Planning Commission may waive up to half of the required parking spaces as follows, and then there's further detail about the size of the property. So, correct me if I'm misstating, Frank, but that was, that actually limits them, Planning Commission purview beyond where it exists now.
That's correct. In other words, the Planning Commission can waive 100% of the parking requirement. We're suggesting that be done away with, and that their powers to waive parking be limited to only 50% of the required parking, and not 100%.
And mind you, they have never done that in any kind of an inappropriate way, is not aiming in that way at all, so, come on up, yeah.
James Rena, 272 Bear Ridge Road. In that case, it's because the lot is within the 200 feet.
It's, right, if it's within 200 feet of municipal parking lot.
So for this particular case on the post office strip, then that lot across the street
Right.
satisfies that.
It would satisfy it in the Planning Commission has discretion if they choose to exercise it. Right.
And overall, right. And overall, I just want to commend you on the plan. I think it shows that our town, I've been part of this town for 30+ years. I have 2 children in the school district. I think we're very progressive. I'm a commercial broker as well in Westchester County, and a lot of these towns are really taking steps to keep our community within the community. We want our children to grow up here. We want my parents to stay in the community. We want to stay in the community, and I think this will help bring good quality tenants, hopefully with a focus on health and wellness, into these spaces on the retail side, and then keep everyone here gathering, living, working, and playing.
Thank you.
So,
Thank
thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, Jim Westling, 96 Pleasantville Road. I just want to go back to the garage dilemma. I built my garage in 2007. Everything was inspected by Mike Testa and his people. My garage is in fact insulated and wired and inspected. I put in the insulation. I'm an amateur woodworker. I love making woodwork. I love building things. I give them to friends. I give them to family members. It's my art. It's what I do so that at the end of the week, of a long week of work, I have something to relax and focus on. I insulated my building to make it quieter for my neighbors. I think the insulation is a good point. The noise, I understand the noise for people's neighbors. I don't think that somebody should tell me that I can't work in my shop for more than 6 hours or more than 4 hours or a certain month. I really don't think anybody should tell me I can't work 6 months of the year, 3 months of the year, whatever it is, on an art project that I want to do.
So is it heated?
No, of course not.
Right. So.
But it is insulated,
Yeah,
and I do
yeah,
use
yeah.
a space
No,
heater.
that's a reasonable point.
And I do
Yeah,
use
yeah.
a space heater in the
Right,
winter.
right.
But isn't the thing with the sound, isn't that what our noise ordinance is for? I mean,
You know,
if I don't start before
I mean,
8
noise
a.m.
ordinances, as you might imagine, are an extremely difficult problem. You have a neighbor who's has parties, they call the cops come, it's too loud, whatever. In the end, it's noise ordinances are reasonable, and we have one. But it's really, as you probably know, lots of neighborhoods, depending on who's doing what where, everybody's fine with it. Some other settings, somebody says, "Are you kidding?" Suddenly my quality of life has been harmed because you allowed my neighbor to do X. I mean, honestly, we have that sometimes with additions that are even permitted as of right. You know, folks. So that's what we're trying to grapple with. Nobody's
Right.
trying to be unfair to anybody,
No,
and
no.
believe me,
I'm
everybody.
just here to say
I have a table saw in my garage. I assure you, I have no insulation. Although I've sometimes wished I did.
You know what? I'll give you the name of a good insulator. They work pretty cheap, they work really fast, and it'll make your neighbors happier because it'll be quieter.
Yeah.
I don't think
that's
so.
one of the other goals and the changes that we're thinking about in conjunction with all of your comments is to not set up an inherent conflict between what we're writing in the zoning and what may exist in other parts of the code.
Right.
Right?
So, I mean, I think what's clear from all of these discussions is it bears some further investigation.
Yeah.
Right.
We have to look at that language.
Yeah, that would be, I would appreciate that.
Okay.
Certainly. I
Yeah.
built my building in 2007.
No, you make a good
So
point.
I think that what we're talking about, I would be grandfathered beyond.
Yeah.
But still, you know, I mean, there are plenty of woodworkers in this town. There are plenty of musicians in this town. There are plenty of people that paint in this town.
Right.
Yeah.
It's an expression of art, and you need a place to do your expression of art. And I think that we shouldn't restrict that. I think that's very important.
Understood.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other takers?
Yeah.
Welcome.
Dennis Thornton, 24 Southview Street. I would also like to comment on the use of the accessory buildings. Personal view, I think when people buy a piece of property that has outbuildings, they look at this property for its potential. And if they can do something with it other than put their snowblower or their car in it and make it into a home studio, a workshop, an office, a sanctuary, a quiet place to get away from the family, that should be their right and privilege so long as it is not bothering their neighbors.
Right.
And if
That's the key
that
point
is-
though, right
if
there.
it's not bothering their neighbors.
Right.
I feel we live in an area of the country that unless you do insulate and put some heat in it, it's rather uncomfortable for most of the year. So if you're going to utilize that space to paint or draw or do yoga, you need to have it be insulated and have heat. And I differentiate that from habitation, which would incorporate the need to have plumbing and a place to cook and a bed to sleep. That is full habitation. That is not extended day use.
So would you, in a situation where somebody has a heated studio, whatever, and they end up with people sleeping there?
That's habitation.
Yeah.
But if they're out there painting all day,
yeah,
and at the end of the day they walk into their house and that's where they habitate.
Right, but so in the
That's
hypothetical that
safe.
you just described, now another person comes along, buys that house, and it's got heat and it's got insulation. And just so we're clear, I don't think anybody's thinking insulation's a checkbox that, Robert says, oh, you have insulation. It was just used as an example of one of the things that could be used as a marker for that, right? And then now, you just walk across the driveway, you can get to the kitchen and the bathroom and all that sort of stuff, and as Peter mentioned, people start sleeping there. Now, there's no visible, if we're talking about conjecture and what ifs, what if somebody does yoga there 4 hours a day and goes back into their house? Personally, and I don't think anybody would have a problem with that. But the potential is there for, as Peter was mentioning, that to go into a gray zone if somebody else buys the house or kids get older and whatever. Now you've got the problem of none of the sort of concrete examples of habitation, plumbing, a stove, an oven, and all that stuff is there, and yet it is still being used as if it was a part of the house. And this is where I talk about what we were saying earlier. If the primary use of that building is no longer a garage or an outbuilding, and you're using it for something else occasionally, I can't imagine any of us would think that that's an unreasonable thing. if the modifications to that building are such that it could be construed as a permanent alteration of that building's use, that's where we have to be careful, because if those lines aren't really clear, he has an extremely difficult time understanding what it is we want him to enforce.
Correct.
And that's the challenge.
Are you going to penalize potential? Right, just because an individual will make that space comfortable.
Right.
They could put a bed in there, yes, they could, but they may not.
That's right.
And so are you going to create rules that will penalize people for creating the potential?
No, what I think we need to do is get the language right, so that if we can craft the language so that the nuance is clearly defined, that we are not after that use like you just mentioned. What we're really trying to make sure we speak clearly about in the regulation is that sort of permanent shift over to a use that's no longer a garage. So if we need to go back and look at the language and make sure we've written that the right way, so that we aren't addressing the person who wants to go in their garage and do some woodwork, or the person who wants to draw or type or any of that sort of stuff. But we are able to prevent somebody putting a music studio 3 feet from their neighbor. That's where we have to have the challenge of dealing with that neighbor who comes to us and says, how can you have let them put a music studio 3 feet from my house? And we look in our zoning code, and if it's there as of right, we're very limited on what we can do. That's the challenge.
So it seems to me that we should be able to develop that language, though. So, for example, if we said clearly, no sleeping facilities, no beds. Now, this gentleman makes himself an art studio, then he sells his house. A new buyer buys and goes, look at this great space. I'm going to put a bed in there. They're committing a violation.
Right.
Just from putting a bed in there, because we've said you can't have a bed in there.
Right.
And maybe it's no music studios. Okay, it is artistic, but on the other hand, it is loud. And so I mean, I think with a little work,
creating an art studio, it ain't going back to a garage.
What I'm hearing,
right? If I put all that into making it into an art studio,
I mean, some folks are.
It's not going to be a garage
what I'm hearing is our community wants something other than what we've got now, which Robert has tried to clarify, but our community wants something different. That's okay. I mean, we're working on the zoning anyway, so you know, I think it's just a matter of just writing it down and putting it together the right way.
Language right.
You know.
But again, you know, the problem is some folks have described insulation and drywall and some fluorescent lights for their table saw, and other folks are imagining insulation and drywall and recessed can lights on electronic controls and a 60-inch TV and the whole nine yards.
Jimmy, you know what,
Right,
there's plenty of people that can do, you know, some people like to spend their time in a different aesthetic. I know lots of people who use their garage, their kids have a band, they're painting, they're doing woodwork, and they haven't done any of that. And it's noisier than anything else that someone might build that looks nice. So I think we're getting a little caught up in the aesthetic of something rather than the use.
It's not the aesthetic, it's the impact on neighbors.
Look, kids could put a band in a garage and you put no heat in there, no drywall in there, no lights in there, and it's louder than anything else that you could possibly do.
Right,
so
the thing they're doing is still a garage. That would still be fine.
And it's
still a garage.
transient.
They haven't changed it.
And it's a transient use.
But it's not. I mean, if that's all that's in there, we're
Right,
we're
but
talking
then
about
But then
insulation.
it's still
or
a
not.
garage. Like, I'm looking at it, like, if you've made modifications, which is gonna, like you said, turn this thing into something that will never more again be a use that it was initially intended for, a garage.
How many people in Pleasantville now have a quote-unquote home office?
Sure.
And if they have that space and they turn that space into that home office, you're now going to tell them you can't do that?
No.
Well, so I mean,
That's what we're talking
again,
about.
I sigh, not because it doesn't sound reasonable. It does sound reasonable, but I can tell you there have been knockdown, drag-out fights in this community and every other community. Are you kidding? I moved in, and suddenly someone's running an import-export business, and FedEx is in here 17 times a day, or
It's
somebody
not
is a
commercial zone.
psychologist, and there are cars parked all over the street, or, you know, right. No, I understand.
Well,
but
yes, but it's a violation potentially of other areas of the code. If the zoning isn't right, then it's allowed under the zoning, and then we've got that conflict that we just talked
Right.
about.
So I think
It's frustrating. Look, it's
right.
harder on our end too. We're trying to get this right. It's
We
not
hear
like we're trying
you
to make
without
this
question. We understand what you're asking for, or at least what each of you individually is asking for. So I don't think you're all asking for exactly the same thing, but I haven't.
I don't even have a garage.
I feel like we need to have a tour of the garages in Pleasantville. I want to see all these art
There's a
studios
fundraising.
that are tucked
Yeah, we should
away.
make a coffee table.
I ran ASO out of mine for 10 years.
Yeah, we could make a soccer stadium.
All right.
Thank you for your comment.
Are there other speakers on this matter or anything related to the zoning? Welcome.
Zucker.
Mr. Stargiotti, how are you?
Oh, wait a minute. What?
And your name?
John, our friends. We go way back.
Hi, Mr. Lord.
Hi, how are you?
I'm Joseph Zucker. I live at 301 Bedford Road. I don't want to talk about garages. It's there's this. I want to talk about like zoning, which is why this is here.
Can't hear you.
Speak up.
Can you hear me? Okay. So there's obviously like Pleasantville's full of history. There's a whole overlay. There's a special overlay district as far as I'm concerned, along like Bedford Road for all those houses, and you can't really manipulate them. We even tried when we were renovating, but like we couldn't because there's such strict codes on what you can do to the property. And so like there are other historical properties in Pleasantville, and there's one by Foxwoods. It's the Manville
Yes.
Mansion, and I was looking on the tax records recently, and I saw that there's like this street that it's on, and there are 4 houses, and all 4 houses are under the same name. So I just wanna see if like that it's possible if we can expand this special overlay district.
So
there.
happy to have the conversation, and thank you for bringing that up. Just to be clear, none of that is embedded in any way in the matter that we have for the public hearing that we're in right now.
But it is a zoning.
So-
No, but
so-
it's a good zoning issue.
Except we're talking
about zoning. So
I don't mean to cut you off, and what I'm going to suggest is we have that conversation separately, and I know you reached out to me at one point about it. Worthwhile conversation to have, but we ought not confuse people about what we're talking about here. So I think another night is the answer, and if you want to come back, we'll choose a good time and hash it out.
Okay.
Thank you.
It is a good topic to talk
Yeah.
about.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
Any other speakers?
Oh, boy.
Right.
Some food.
No, I should have.
You should have.
And for the record, I have slept in my garage.
Willingly or unwillingly?
Name and
John
address.
Cunningham, 14 Tyler Lane.
Thank you.
Parking, the parking waivers. I'm curious, I know you're talking about just the 4-story, in the rezoning of the block across there, but the implications, possible implications of the way that the parking waivers are written into the code affect other parts of the A1 district, which...
And the B.
And the B. And I'm curious, Mr. Fish, have you modeled out the worst possible scenario in terms of total cars, total parking, that the new, looking at the master plan and all the potential new building or the way that it can be reconfigured could add additional parking pressures to the village? Have we looked at that and modeled that out to understand the total potential impact? Not that it necessarily will come to fruition, but the total potential impact.
Yeah, you want to?
What the board has is called an environmental assessment form. And the methodology in that, we look at traffic and parking, the methodology is not to compare a build-out of all of the parking compared to nothing. In other words, it's called a gap analysis. You build out what is the net difference between this zoning and the existing zoning. This zoning does not allow more than an FAR of 2. And I'm sorry. The FAR is just a number. You multiply times the lot size, and it gives you the total square footage you can build.
The floor area ratio. So if you have a 10,000 square foot lot with a FAR of 2, you could build a 20,000 square foot building.
Got it.
But if it's 4 stories, it's only occupying a quarter of the lot.
Got it.
So we've not changed the basic 2 FAR. So going from 3 stories to 4 stories doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting more square footage. You still are controlled by the FAR of 2. However, you can, if you go slightly higher, you then can get the same square footage as the mayor was just saying on less coverage. So the bottom line is this has a very modest, minimal impact on traffic because you're not going to have that much greater square footage, and it has minimal impact on parking, particularly if you're putting parking on the ground. Under the building.
But I think what you're asking is if they were to do all these waivers, what's the worst case
Oh,
scenario?
sorry, I'm sorry.
That's,
Okay,
that's
what-
where I'm going.
okay.
If the
Good.
board was going to insist
Good, I got
on there being parking pursuant to whatever the FAR is, then I think we feel a lot better. But there is the potential, even with curtailing potential waivers that the planning can give, of waiving a whole bunch of parking in a village that's now already constrained, and what's that incremental mean? And that all plays into the environmental impact of which you're gonna vote on tonight potentially. And I just try and understand what, I mean, all the other stuff, I'm not sure what that impact.
Well, so Jonathan, I mean, we have parking requirements per residential unit, as you heard, just as we always have. We're modestly changing them to reflect what seem to be the state of the art. And if you build apartments, you're required to build parking to accommodate your apartments, so that you don't offload that to the street or to the public as a problem. The Planning Commission currently has the right to waive those. I'm not aware that they ever have. We are actually trimming that capacity by half and adding a bunch of other requirements. And in the case of a lot of 5,000 square feet or larger, which is almost certainly the case for any significant project that involves underground parking and apartments, if the Planning Commission were to provide a waiver, and the reason they would have provided the waiver was that there was a solid, definable, quantifiable reason to believe that the uses for parking of this building interleaved with available parking in a public lot, they could provide a waiver, and if they did provide a waiver on a lot greater than 5,000 square feet, the developer would have to pay an in lieu payment per parking space into the village
Per
at an
year.
amount to be determined and updated regularly by the board.
That was my other question. Is that in lieu of payment a yearly payment, or is that a one-time payment?
We haven't decided that yet,
Right.
but we haven't really talked about that, but my thought would it would be a one-time payment, a capital payment, and we put it into a capital account and use it for production and maintenance of parking.
But, I mean, there are a whole series of trigger events here that, even to get to that point, and the Planning Commission is, and as they should be, extremely cautious about any such waiver, and to my knowledge, have actually never done it.
So again, that's good to hear on maybe some of the new construction that might be considered for there. They're gonna have to have parking, conceivably. There's also on Wheeler Avenue and a number of other places, Washington Avenue, the potential of redoing those buildings to include apartment building or apartments at that point.
So
which changes the
Right,
parking
I mean,
requirements.
unless you could end up with a bigger parcel, the problem for an individual existing building on Wheeler is that it's essentially impossible to knock that down and build parking and then the building. So you can't have parking as a primary first floor use.
So it'll have to be waived if you want to bring apartments into the
I mean, as you
downtown
know,
area.
having sat on this board, we had people come and say, I want to knock down my building on Wheeler and build apartments, but I have zero parking, and the answer was no.
Understood, but we
Right.
now have a master plan that says that's what we want to do.
No.
Okay.
How does it say that?
I thought the whole idea
No,
of the
the
A1
master,
district was to
the master plan,
encourage-
the master plan encourages redevelopment of areas that need redevelopment, but it requires that anybody who develops new apartments provide the parking.
Okay.
So what essentially means is that unless somebody was able to come up with a bigger parcel, they're not going to be able to accommodate the parking. The circumstance we have at the old Try and Buy site and the adjacent building that was next door to it where tape measure was, is that that parcel is big enough that that developer was able to dig down and create parking underneath and behind, and do that viably to provide all the parking requirements and then some for a 3-story building.
I don't think I agree that what happens on the post office side of Memorial Plaza in terms of parking will impact more of the village, depending on if it creates more cars and more parking need and they don't have enough over there. I understand that, so it has a greater impact. But I don't think that by this zoning, we need to try to solve all those problems. For example, Wheeler Avenue, and what kind of development are we having on Wheeler Avenue? 5 or 10 years from now, parking dynamics might be very different. The user economy might take off even more, and maybe people are leasing cars or sharing cars or whatever's going to happen in the future. And some board in the future might say, okay, we have a master plan that envisions some new development on Wheeler Avenue. It's appropriate to do it now. We don't need as much parking as we did 10 years ago, because it's a different world then, and there's a different driving and parking dynamic happening then. So we tried in the I think we tried in the master plan to look down the road and to put ideas on the table that might be implemented, but that's not what we're trying to do here. But I do take your point that you build a lot of units, people have cars, and if they park them over there and they don't have enough parking spaces, they're going to park them elsewhere, and that's going to impact things elsewhere.
But they would have
and
had
we have
to.
thought about it. I mean, don't think we haven't thought. It's not like
They would have had to make a very convincing argument before a 7-person planning commission and a public hearing at the planning commission to achieve that. So, I mean, what we're looking at here in this proposal is a tightening of those waiver requirements rather than a loosening, and a combination of changes in the zoning that actually make it imaginable that someone could achieve the on-site parking requirements that we require.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm asking a question only because, I mean, and zoning isn't my favorite topic, so.
Not in tax or Ferraris.
So, but I asked the question only because I think the perception is, and certainly I have the perception, is that it's been very easy to get parking waivers in this village.
Listen to this.
So
You're mixing two things here.
I'm
you
sure
mean a
I-
parking.
I'm-
You
if
mean
it's
a
only
parking.
two, that's good.
You mean a parking variance.
Okay.
This waiver is a potential planning commission waiver, which is in their review of the planning of a project, the planning commission is convinced that there is adequate parking in municipal lots to accommodate part of the otherwise required parking, and therefore they will say, and that almost certainly would be interleaved uses, meaning you're building something that requires parking at night, the adjacent lot is mostly empty at night, therefore it could make sense. The parking variance is an entirely different problem, which is you come to the zoning board, you say, I want to turn a retail store into a restaurant.
Yeah.
The zoning code says I need 19 parking spaces, I have none, and the zoning board has to decide whether they will provide that variance. And most of the time, those variances have been provided in circumstances where it's an existing building, in many cases an existing building that's been here 75 or more years.
Right.
And if you say you will not give a parking variance, you lock that building into obsolescence.
Well, and that's great, and I hope that's helpful. I actually found that to be very helpful, actually, to
Know the difference.
make the distinction between the waiver.
Right.
Because from a practical standpoint, the cars are in the street, so
Right, so you see
people
cars.
don't actually understand, oh, well, that car's parking there and taking up spots all day long, because it's a variance and not a waiver, so,
Look,
I think that's true.
I can't speak for the zoning board, but I will say my perception of it is that the variances they provide are for the most part variances where a reasonable use in an existing building cannot be accommodated in the current code. And that's different from saying...
You need to defend it. I don't disagree with you.
That's different from saying, I'm going to knock down a parcel and have a blank slate.
Right.
And I don't want to provide all the parking that you say I need.
Right.
And that's the essence of what I was trying to get at, is
Okay.
that the new building, if we're going to allow a developer to do a 4-story building, honestly, provide the parking.
That's what the code says.
And I would hope that the planning board, it does not find a way to waive or variant waive.
I mean, honestly, the planning
some of
commission
that stuff, because honestly, the village. I mean, you got folks from Grove Street here who've been here at a lot of other meetings complaining about the parking, and that's probably variance related as opposed to waived related. But again, I don't think they care.
Cars there.
Cars there. So
nothing about my belief. Nothing about what we've written here has opened the floodgates to people building anything and not providing the parking that's required.
And we tightened that, right?
And to the extent, and Joe, I take your point, but this stuff all has a way of interlocking so that when you move on to Wheeler Avenue or whatever else, there's now precedent to how this parking's been handled. So
the challenge for us now is specifically on the post office block, the vacant land that's there, or the dilapidated building that's sitting on top of the rock, and how do we get that redeveloped, and how do we encourage those owners to do something productive with that land, and at the same time not have impacts, but we can't. We're not going to have no impacts. We're going to have some impacts. Hopefully some beneficial impacts, tax dollars. Probably some not so beneficial upshot is going to be parking. Hopefully we'll get some folks that, if they build something over there, will live over there and walk to the train station, so they won't be taking a car out. Maybe they'll only own one car instead of owning two or three, like somebody in a house would do. You know, I don't know how it's going to.
But stores and restaurants and
I applaud that whole redevelopment.
And
I think it's great.
And the same thing with Warren Schlotes, or what he formerly owned, the Drive-By building. That development, same concept. They've got adequate parking over there, though, which is great. Off street,
which they're required to provide.
Correct.
They've got it all right there, which is terrific. But I'm hoping for the same thing, where they have some nice retail out front with some good viable stores and some people that live upstairs that spend their money in town and walk to the train to go to work and do all those things.
You were saying, sort of, has anybody really sat down and looked, if this whole thing were to come to fruition?
That's where
has
I
anybody
started.
sat down and said exactly how much parking do we need? And
Correct.
The truth is no. I mean, because we don't know. First of all, we don't even know that this is going to happen. But
that's a hypothetical.
Yeah, I mean, but at some point we are, because I mean, what I would hate to do is get into a position where there was a big piece left and we couldn't move it in the right direction because we had used up all our waivers or
Right, exactly. I mean, that's
yeah,
probably a good exercise, nonetheless,
and also just so you know,
like what potentially would we need?
I know you know, but for everybody else who's here,
don't assume,
who might be watching, no, I think you know that we've always got our eyes open for new parking opportunities around the village, things we can do, places we can go, that we can improve our own parking needs. We just are always. I mean, right down there's an area of the village that is underutilized down Tompkins, where we had it surveyed, and it looks like that with the right kind of development and curbing and striping and so on, we've got a whole bunch of spaces on land that we already own, but it's all intermingled with all those adjacent buildings going down Tompkins towards where the train is on the right hand side, and we're just always looking for it. Costs money to implement it, so we have to figure that out too.
Okay.
We're always looking for new municipal parking opportunities.
I believe. Okay,
all right,
thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other comments in the public hearing?
Yep, we have one.
Yep, come on up.
Janet Iger, 96 Pleasantville Road. I don't have to worry about the parking because I parked my car.
Grab the mic if you would. I guess it's not picking up very well.
Okay. Janet Iger, 96 Pleasantville Road.
You got to speak up though.
Yeah,
she
that's
can hear.
Yeah.
Sorry.
You can take it out of the thing.
Yeah, pull it out.
It's easier.
There you go.
Hi. Janet Iger, 96 Pleasantville Road. I give up then.
No, come on,
Ask
please,
your
please,
question.
ask your question. No.
Okay.
I want you to ask your question. We'll repeat it if need be.
Go
Yes.
ahead and ask your question.
I parked my car in my garage.
Yes.
But and I really appreciate that you're hearing what we're saying about the garages. So my question to you is, originally, first there was wording and it was just going to be cleaned up, and then you had realized there was concern, and you had this public forum, but then there was like you were going to decide later, but then you were going to rework the wording. So are you then going to show us and the community the reworked wording so that we can
yes,
Right, so
continue?
here's how it
there'll
could
be
go.
another
Right,
comment.
So let me just, for
That's what I
Connie,
wanted
for your
to
purposes, the
understand.
question was, we've discussed the idea of changing the wording that's in the current code about garage accessory buildings. And if we do change it, will we come back to the community for further discussion? So several things could happen. If we change it in a way that is substantive, we would have to go back and have another public hearing on that. I think it is also possible that we will simply elect to strike any changes at all in the existing code because of the need to resolve this, because we have all these other things that we can't allow to get held up for this.
Right.
In which case, we would have to come back to the garage thing as its own question with its own hearing. But just to be clear, striking the proposed change puts Robert back in the position of a little bit of unclarity, but it does say with clarity, no human habitation. This is the way it's read for you.
I'm
Yeah.
okay with,
Okay.
I mean, I agree with you,
So-
no sleeping, no cooking, no
Yeah.
plumbing, no that, but I
Right.
don't want to feel self-conscious, as this gentleman mentioned, if I back my car out of my garage, spread out my yoga mat, and lift
Please-
my ankles up in the air.
please do that.
my
Absolutely.
neighbor is going to say,
Please-
hey,
please-
she's been in there
No.
for 2
And we
hours.
No,
would
no.
never,
stretching."
No.
we would never now modify this language without getting it
Yeah.
out to everybody
Okay,
again. And
that's
But
what- that's
pull
what
the
really-
car out
I
and do
think
yoga.
that was
You're
an
entitled.
Knock yourself out.
But that was an excellent point, that then
Yes.
you're at the mercy of a neighbor
Yeah, yeah.
calling
Sure.
up
No,
and saying, hey,
we
her
would
car's
never
usually in the
slip
garage.
this in, like, okay, we had the meeting, and then we're gonna change the language and vote
Yeah.
on it, nobody
That's
sees
all.
it, never.
All right, thank you. Next person there.
I'll try to speak as loud as I possibly can. Does
Okay,
everyone hear me?
into the mic if you would, yes.
Hopefully. Okay,
Yes.
hi, I'm Chris Bamford. I live at 233 Broadway. I wrote it out because
Okay,
save time this way regarding the accessory building.
okay.
I agree that the rights of both homeowner and neighbor should be considered with zoning. However, I feel the proposed language in its present form appears to be unnecessarily restrictive for the homeowner. From my perspective, the mention of living, sleeping, cooking can be addressed with the prohibition of accessory apartments in the village. That seems to be covered already. I've heard quite a bit about it from my realtor. But the remainder seems to be biased against the homeowner. There are noise ordinances, setback laws are in place to address concerns that we have, and police to broker disputes between neighbors. I feel we should have choices on how we use our property, as long as a resident isn't turning their space into a commercial property, an Airbnb, an accessory apartment, an import-export business. I think that we should have some flexibility as to how we use our own property that we pay very good money for in this village. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other comments? Sure, Robert. Yeah.
If the zoning stays as is currently, and my interpretation is as you're reading, because it's currently how I believe it to be, you can get a waiver from the zoning variance. And one of the reasons for writing it more clear is not just for me, is for the Zoning Board of Appeals, so they don't repeatedly come up with this issue on each individual case. You try to clarify it to clean that up. But then it would leave to their purview for that person, individual, to seek a variance or an interpretation of my interpretation from the board. So you currently can have that in place right now as the zoning is written. But that just puts the onus on them to interpret each on a case-by-case basis. So another reason why cleaning the language up, whether it's for the village, what they believe the residents want it to be, or the way it's written now, right now, currently, it would come down to the zoning board making that determination dependent on the specifics that you're requesting. But right now, the way it's interpreted, if you come to me, I would deem it to be that you would need a variance to go forward, currently as written. So if it stays as is, that's currently, because I have to make the determination of what I believe it's the essence of how it's written right now.
Okay, so that, for example, could be an argument in favor of making this change and then continuing the discussion with neighbors and changing it again.
Correct.
But your point being you're left in a gray zone if we don't change it.
Right, and but
Understood.
ultimately, anything written in the zoning, and somebody disagrees with my interpretation, you go to the zoning board for an understanding and their determination on what I stated.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jeff Clemens. I live at 7 View Street. And I just wanted to say, I just wanted to express my support for all the things that people say. People have creative outlets and they want to do things in the garage. Seems like you guys are all starting to get into agreement. It was more about the language. Kind of got my hackles up when I first read it. And again, I want to be able to use my space not just for an hour. My hands can't work the tools, and I want to be able to stay out there a little longer. So if I run a space heater, and I don't want to get dinged for that. I'm not exactly sure what constitutes when an inspector, what he decides. I remember years of living in commercial spaces, or not living, but working in commercial spaces in Brooklyn. And, you know, fire department, people coming in and determining is there a bed, is there showers, is there, you know, the pots and pans and dishes, and that's usually how they determined who, you know, who was living there and who wasn't illegally, you know, in a commercial space. But again, it goes back to habitation and.
Yeah, no, I understand.
Seems like this has been a good discussion.
As said before, our core problem is there are plenty of folks who would like to turn a garage into an extension of their home. Which seems reasonable to them, but which puts that use well beyond the setbacks that are required for that use for the house. So that's kind of what we're struggling with. So, thank you. I understand your point.
Thank you for all the comments.
Thank you. You know, there's also life safety issues.
Right.
Which we haven't really focused on.
Not at all.
And there's also issues about increasing tax assessments if you create an additional room.
Right. So, all right. Are there any further comments about the zoning before we close the public hearing?
Joe, did you want to talk? Looked like you wanted to come back up, or are you good?
You got to come up. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so the question, I really didn't, I didn't understand when you tried to clarify, you really confused me. So I really didn't understand when you tried to clarify that. So if you built a garage and the town came out and looked at it and they knew you were building it so that your husband could have a wood shop, you know, that he could have a table saw and stuff in there. And everybody saw it that way. So I don't understand.
I'm not the guy that would decide that, but I'm not sure that's a problem. It's a garage with garage doors, and in
Yes,
good weather
it's a
you pull
garage.
open the garage. You
And-
could pull the car in.
Right.
It's a garage, but you're doing something else in it. I think
not what we're talking about
the
changing.
core, and we need to clarify that. I understand your point.
But, okay.
The core problem we have is there are folks who would like to build a room, just like a room in their house, in their garage, and understand why they would want to do it. I totally understand that. And in some settings, their neighbors would say, please let them do that. That's fine with me. In some other settings, they wouldn't. And if you give someone the affirmative right to do that, you've taken away a protection that has always existed within neighborhoods where people are pretty tightly packed. So that's the issue. And trust me, again, and not aiming at anyone individually, there'll be folks who will come and say, I'm trying to insulate and put up drywall for my whatever painting studio, and 3 years later someone's living there and paying
No,
$1,200 a month.
Living
Right.
is different.
No, I know it's different, but I mean, of course, part of the problem with codes in general is there's always some percentage of people who are going to break the rules, and
But that doesn't mean that the whole thing should be changed because a couple of people aren't going to do the right thing. I don't agree. In my personal opinion, I don't agree with that approach.
Joe, if you're a felon,
Joe, no one's
you
just
don't have-
here
you don't have
clapping.
to
No
be
one's
if you're a
doing
felon,
that.
It's okay.
No
Joe.
one is doing. No one's conceiving
No,
doing that.
I don't agree with that approach.
Sorry, you need to come up to the microphone, I think.
all right.
Can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
All right, are there any further comments about the zoning prior to our closing the public hearing?
I want to key to that garage.
All right. There being no further comments, is there a motion to close the public hearing on amending Chapter 185 zoning?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Motion approved. The public hearing is closed. We thank you all. As mentioned, we have later in our resolutions here, a resolution to declare a negative declaration under the SECRA. I don't think, in my view, anything has been said that would change our intention to move ahead with that. And the earliest we would vote on the zoning changes would be 2 weeks from now. But we'll have to discuss further this. It sounds, obviously, the primary point of concern here is the accessory building thing. We certainly got some comments about the other zoning changes, but they were not nearly as numerous as the matter about the accessory buildings. Sound good? I thank you all for your attention. You're welcome to stay for our exciting resolutions, but you don't have to.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Yes,
Likewise.
thanks for coming to the meeting.
May I just say one thing? You can all,
Yes.
just looking a little forward.
Nice job,
You can
Frank.
delete something from the proposed zoning
Yes.
amendment and then adopt the rest of it.
Right.
Twice in one day.
Or, alternatively, if you're gonna modify it, then you can't adopt.
Right. So we could delete it and come back on another
time.
And leave it as is.
Right. But clearly,
So we can't make any, let's say we looked at something and we wanted to make, it's not my understanding, if we were making a modification to the language, it would be dependent upon, if it's substantial and more restrictive on the community, then we'd have to have another public hearing. But if we want to make some modifications that are not so substantial or not substantial and maybe
insubstantial,
then we could adopt that modification.
okay.
Can I make a suggestion, Tim?
Yes?
Jules laid it out.
He needs
You're
you on
gonna
the
go to
mic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna miss
Can't
your.
hear
I think Joel's just laid out for you a clear legal way to proceed, which I think is the most practical. And I would recommend to you to delete that last sentence on accessory uses. That then makes this proposal before you clear-cut. It clearly has, to be quite honest, in the environmental assessment form, we haven't gone into life safety issues on accessory uses. Accessory uses was added to this later. I think what you should do is discuss it, perhaps give yourself a work session. There's other, I said to Joel we could give him, there's other codes out there that have solved this issue.
Yeah, I was
and
gonna
might,
ask you that.
you know,
There's
might
other
help you
language.
in a discussion. But the clearest way forward, it's perfectly what Joel says, just delete this one sentence. That would allow you to do the neg deck tonight, and in 2 weeks, just adopt this zoning.
Hey, we can do the neg deck tonight with.
You can do it.
With it. Right.
Yes.
There's no issue there.
But the clearest way, I think, is to delete this sentence. Then do the neg, or agree to do that. Do the neg deck, vote the zoning in, then address accessory units so that you can actually have a good work session and people know what you're doing and you can discuss this. Because what I heard tonight, I think Nicole raised a good point, and that is, what is it that you're really trying to do? There are several issues involved in this. One is the setback. Has nothing to do with accessory units. Has nothing to do with an accessory use. Setback is different. Environmental impacts are controlled by a noise code. So there's been a lot of confusion about this. And I think you could, with one work session, probably solve this.
Frank,
But I think you need a separate work
I
session.
have a question for you on a different point of this. With regard to new construction on the post office block and my suggestion of perhaps having a front yard setback for a larger sidewalk, I didn't see it, has that been, I don't think that was in what was noticed, because it came up after we noticed this public hearing.
As far as I know, it was, but I
It-
gotta
it
rely on
was.
It was? I didn't see it. So
I'd
I'm
have
not
to stand
looking
corrected.
right
No,
by
it's
Pat.
added.
As far as I know, it
The
was.
provision on page 24 says that sidewalks should, if possible, be 10 feet wide and ideally 12.
Right.
Okay.
That's there.
That-
Yeah.
then it's
And
there.
that was sent to the county?
Yes.
Yes.
And they came back on that, they're okay on it.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, great.
All right, I thank you for that.
And by the way, what Frank indicated was my recommendation. Frank and I discussed about an hour ago during the hearing, so it's really a joint recommendation to delete that one.
Right, it doesn't address Robert's problem.
No.
Right.
But he's had the problem.
Well, he's
I
had
think
the
it was a
problem.
separate
He's had the
solution.
We're going to have to
Yeah,
tackle
he's
it.
just gonna refer people to the zoning.
We're going to have to
He
tackle it
has
as a
remedy.
separate
And
element.
Peter,
We're
sorry.
going to have to address
but
this
in the
issue as a
meantime.
separate
Yeah,
solution.
that's what I'm saying. You have to address it. You can't just leave it hanging there.
I think it is, just so you know, I wouldn't have made this recommendation without talking to Robert.
Understood.
I said, Robert,
Right.
is this okay? Give the board a month, or whatever the board needs. And he said, yes, I totally understand that.
All right, I thank you for
Thank you,
that.
Frank. Nice job.
Much appreciated. Frank, thank you. Joel, you're relieved of duty unless you want to listen to our resolutions.
No, I love nothing more.
Number 149, Nicole.
I almost forgot we were still doing this.
Yeah.
We're still in a meeting, yeah.
All right.
Thank you. for being safe.
Resolved that the pre-check register dated September 11, 2017 is hereby approved as listed below. For the fiscal year 2017-18, general fund $143,272.89. Special purpose fund $423. Water fund $6,012.38. Capital fund $1,207.50. Refuse fund $1,425.47 for a total of $152,341.24.
Is there a second?
Second.
Comments or questions on the check register? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. 150, Steve.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby approves the request from Sarles Lane residents to hold a block party on Saturday, September 23rd, with a rain date of September 24th, from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. Always a good time on Sarles Lane. 151, Colleen.
Whereas sealed bids were advertised in the official village newspaper and received on August 16, 2017 for tree removal and pruning services. And whereas bids were received as per the following and reviewed by the Superintendent of Public Works as follows. Ramos Tree Services, daily service $2,200, $350 per hour. The Care of Trees, $22.80 at $360 per hour. Dom's Tree Service for $49.51.68 at $804.64 per hour. Now therefore be resolved that the Board of Trustees, based upon the recommendation of the Superintendent of Public Works, hereby awards the bid to Ramos Tree Service.
Is there a second?
Second.
Comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved. 152, Joe.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby approves the following part-time recreation assistant appointments effective September 1, 2017 at a salary of $20 per hour. Olivia Aziak, Philip Garcia, Felicia Kratz, Daniel Sanchez, Jeanette Benetti, Eric Akowski, thank you, Stephanie Village, and Bonnie Bopp.
Is there a second?
Second.
Panther Club.
Is that Stephanie
Club.
Vila, not Village?
Sorry?
Stephanie Vila, not Village, I
Did it
think.
spell check pick up village
Yeah.
instead of?
Oh, I
Yeah.
said Stephanie Village because that's
Yeah.
what it says.
Yeah.
No,
But
it's Stephanie
Double
Villa.
check.
Right.
there's a lovely young lady in town named Stephanie Villa.
Yes.
Okay.
Is it Villa?
why I did that.
All in
Spell check.
favor?
Thank you.
Aye.
Motion approved. 153, Nicole.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the village administrator to sign the 2017-18 snow and ice agreements with the New York State Department of Transportation, and the agreement is attached to in the record.
Is there a second?
Second.
Same as always, Patty. State reimburses us for our
They give us
plowing.
an estimate of what they think, it's worth to plow Manville Road and Broadway, and then they end up with amendments for the next 5 years because they don't expect the type of snow we get.
And then
So
they should- they
we're
plus it up,
guaranteed a
right?
minimum. I mean, this is our minimum, and then from there is escalation if there are. catastrophic storm events like we've had on occasion.
Yeah, last
So-
year the plus up was significant.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So this is, this is typical. This is typical state snow and ice agreement, but it won't snow this year, I promise.
Okay, thank you for that. All in favor? Aye, motion
Aye.
approved. 154, Steve.
Whereas the Village of Pleasantville conducts village elections pursuant to Article 15 of the New York State Election Law, and whereas New York State Election Law 15-104 1-C provides that the Board of Trustees of a village may request the County Board of Elections to conduct their general village election held in March of each year. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Pleasantville does hereby request that the Westchester County Board of Elections conduct all Village of Pleasantville village elections, and be it further resolved that this resolution shall be effective for all elections in the Village of Pleasantville held more than 6 months after the date of the adoption of this resolution.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we are, at this point, fair to say, Judy, in the minority of communities in having our village clerk run elections, and this proposes to hand it off to the county.
It's about 50-50 now.
Is it 50-50?
Yeah,
Soon to be 51-49, or
With a
52-43.
tipping point.
Yeah. So at any rate, we've had discussion about this at various points. Some communities have switched their village elections to November. We're not proposing to do that, but it does, I think, make sense.
It does.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved. 155. Go.
Okay, here we go.
Here we go. That's a doozy.
Whereas the Pleasantville Village Board adopted an updated master plan update to its 1995 master plan on January 9, 2017. Whereas said master plan update was prepared in accordance with New York State Village law and provides a guide for land use and development decisions, the adoption of municipal regulations, and the investment of public funds for infrastructure. Whereas the master plan update made a number of recommendations for zoning code revisions, particularly focused on the central business district to advance the following objectives, which are reflected in the record. Whereas on January 27, 2017, the village contracted with its planning consultant BFJ Planning to amend provisions of the A1 zoning district to implement key provisions of the master plan update. Whereas BFJ initiated work on the zoning code revisions in February 2017 and met regularly with the village board through May 2017 to develop said amendments. Whereas all such meetings with the village board were open to the public. In conjunction with the A1 district zoning amendments, the village building inspector suggested a number of minor revisions to village-wide zoning provisions in order to clarify certain provisions. In May 2017, BFJ prepared a set of draft zoning amendments incorporating the A1 revisions. Whereas the village board directed BFJ to complete Part 1 of a full environmental assessment form pursuant to SECRA, and said EAF Part 1 was submitted to the village board dated May 3, 2017. Whereas the village board declared itself lead agency for this action and authorized the circulation of the EAF and draft plan to Westchester County Department of Planning and the Village Planning Commission. Whereas the Westchester County Department of Planning issued a letter dated June 26, 2017, pursuant to its review under the provisions of section blah, blah, blah of the County Administrative Code, stating that the proposed zoning amendments were consistent with the County Planning Board's long-range planning policies set forth in Westchester 2025 Context for County Municipal Planning and Policies to Guide County Planning, and its recommended strategies set forth. Whereas the village board held a public hearing on the proposed zoning amendments on June 26, 2017, which time all those wishing to be heard were given an opportunity. The village board directed VFJ to complete the EFA Parts 2 and 3 pursuant to SECRA, and said EAF Parts 2 and 3 were submitted to the village board. The village board accepted written comments on the proposed zoning amendments for a period of 2 weeks after the close of the public hearing. Whereas subsequent to the June 26th public hearing, the village board determined the revisions to the proposed zoning amendments were necessary to respond to comments received during the public hearing process. Whereas the Westchester County Department of Planning issued a letter dated July 24, 2017, pursuant to its review under the provisions of Section 239 LM and N of the General Municipal Law and blah, blah, blah of the County Administrative Code, affirming receipt of the revised zoning amendments and stating that it had no further comments. Whereas the village board held a second public hearing on the proposed zoning amendments on September 11, 2017 to reflect additional revisions on the proposed amendments, at which time all those wishing to be heard were given an opportunity to be heard, and therefore be it resolved that the Pleasantville Village Board hereby adopts the attached negative declaration with respect to the proposed action and issues a finding that, based upon the information contained in the full EAF, the proposed action will not have any significant adverse impacts on the environment. No environmental impact statement needs to be prepared, and the secret process is complete. And this takes effect immediately.
Is there a second?
Second.
Yeoman service there, colleague. Comments or questions about the negative declaration?
And everything we talked about tonight regarding that one clause doesn't impact this, right? We can table that essentially and deal with it later.
Well, you mean the
You know,
accessory
yeah,
structures?
what Frank was saying about how we'll just-
I mean, I think that
Bless you.
our options are either not to change it, that is to strike that change, in which case there's no impact because the zoning code doesn't change, or potentially to make it, to change it in some way that does not make it less restrictive. If we were to make it less restrictive, that is to affirmatively say people could do things that, as of the moment, the code does not propose, then we'd be back to the races for a new public hearing.
Yeah, the EAF is not at issue. What would be at issue at our next board meeting is the language you're enacting for the text amendments.
Got it.
You're striking that, so you're.
Right.
Right, okay, so then none of this has any impact on
Right.
all the environmental stuff that we talked about, right?
I think the important part in that whole long diatribe there is the county is in favor of it.
Yes, no, that's
You know,
very
that's it's very important.
They see the consistency
Yep.
with regional planning and with other.
Right.
other
All right.
things.
All in favor of the negative declaration, resolution number 155?
Aye.
Resolution approved. 156, Joe.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes Sustainable Westchester to release operating data to Ampion, 31 St. James Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts, for data management services related to the Westchester Power Program.
Is there a second?
Second.
So this was the discussion that occurred at our meeting last time when Dan Welch, who is the manager of the Westchester Power Program, came to us and indicated that Sustainable Westchester wishes to contract with Ampion to provide analysis services that will not only give all of the member communities a much clearer understanding of what's going on, but also help to guide their process in the next negotiation when the contracts that are in place have to be bid again. Ampion is subject to exactly the same security requirements for any data that Westchester Power is covered by.
I mean, I think the important thing too is they're not selling this to anybody else.
No,
This
no.
is for a very specific purchase. That's what I
Correct.
think
And they're
people are
subject to all
concerned
the
about.
privacy
Right.
laws and all
Yeah.
that. We have to, well, no, it's seconded, right? So,
Yeah.
I mean, were we surprised that they decided they needed to outsource this? Like last year when we were talking about
You know,
this.
I
we
mean,
thought it
I
was
don't
gonna
think
stay
they had
in-house.
anticipated a year ago, but now that they're a year into it, they realize there are a lot of nuances to the data management that are, that require some pros, so. All right.
We're comfortable with it?
I am certainly comfortable with it, yes. And all the other communities, I think, have approved it as well.
Yeah,
So,
and this is.
Judy, we're missing a T in Boston there.
Okay.
All in favor of 156? Aye, motion
Aye.
approved. 157.
Resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby approves the minutes of the meeting held on August 28th, 2017.
Second.
Comments, questions, or corrections?
No.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Is there a motion to go into executive session on
So
matters of
moved.
real estate? Second.
Yeah, so moved.
I'm doing this.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion approved.
Do we actually get to say no to that?
Right.
Sorry.
Good evening, all. All right. I
let's
thank you
go.
all. We're back again here in 2 weeks. Thank you for your attention. Good night.
Good luck.